How's it going? So I'm about to refresh my memory with the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. I need to build a full React website in less than a week, and I'm starting from scratch because I started with some of the tutorials for not even React, a level above it, Next.js, and it was a little bit too high level for me. And with many things in life, the most important thing is to get a solid understanding of the fundamentals. Now, I don't have all the time in the world as I'd like, so I'm gonna have to speed run it a little bit. But we're starting with this 2-hour Learn HTML Fundamentals course, and then the goal is today to also get through this CSS introduction course, and then hopefully I could take these fundamental skills and transition over, go into JavaScript, and sort of just figure things out from there. So let's start with Learn HTML Fundamentals. Introduction to HTML. Welcome to the world of code. Last year, millions of learners from our community started with HTML. Why? HTML is the skeleton of all web pages. It's often the first language learned by developers, marketers, and designers, and is core to front-end development work. If this is your first time touching code, we're excited for what you're about to create. So what exactly is HTML? HTML provides structure to the content appearing on a website, such as images, text, or videos. Right-click on any page on the internet, choose Inspect, and you'll see HTML in a panel of your screen. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. A markup language is a computer language that defines the structure and presentation of raw text. In HTML, the computer can interpret raw text that is wrapped in HTML elements. Hypertext is text displayed on a computer or device that provides access to other text through links, also known as hyperlinks. You probably clicked on a couple of hyperlinks on your way to this Codecademy course. Learning HTML is the first step in creating websites, but even a bit of knowledge can help you inject code snippets into newsletter, blog, or website templates. As you continue learning, you can layer HTML with CSS and JavaScript to create visually compelling and dynamic websites. But for now, we're going to focus on how to add and modify basic content on a page like text, images, and videos. Don't worry if the websites look ugly, we're just getting started. Instructions in the code editor on the right, type your name between H1 and /H1. Then press run. Cool. HTML anatomy. HTML is composed of elements. These elements structure the web page and define its content. Let's take a look at how they're written. The diagram to the right displays an HTML paragraph element. As we can see, the paragraph element is made up of an opening tag, P, the content, hello world, text, a closing tag, /P. A tag and the content between it is called an HTML element. There are many tags that we can use to organize and display text and other types of content like images. Let's quickly review each part of the element pictured. HTML element, or simply element, a unit of content in an HTML document formed by HTML tags and the text or media it contains. HTML tag is the element name surrounded by an opening, what do you call that? I call it like an arrow, but an angle bracket, great. An opening and closing angle bracket. Opening tag, the first HTML tag used to start an HTML element. The tag type is surrounded by opening and closing angle brackets. Content, the information, text, or other elements contained between the opening and closing tags of an HTML element. Closing tag, the second HTML tag used to end an HTML element. Closing tags have a / inside of them directly after the left angle bracket. Instructions: study the diagram to the right to learn about the anatomy of HTML syntax. When you're done, continue the exercise. Great. And this is fun. This was one of the first courses I took. Actually, I took this and another one on Free Code Camp. But it's interesting. It's like a flashback to years ago when I first started ever working with HTML. Crazy. So the body, one of the key HTML elements we use to build a web page is the body element. Only content inside the opening and closing body tags can be displayed to the screen. Here's what opening and closing body tags look like. Body. Why does it indent? Okay. Once the file has a body, many different types of content, including text, images, and buttons, can be added to the body. What's up, doc? Instructions: add a body to your web page using the body element. Add the following code between your opening and closing body tags. Life is very short, and what we have to do must be done in the now. Audre Lorde. How does it look? Beautiful. Note, while some browsers may render some content outside body tags as well to accommodate the occasional mistake in your HTML, not all browsers do this. The best way to ensure that all your HTML renders the same way in all browsers is to ensure that your elements remain within the opening and closing body tags. Great. HTML structure. HTML is organized as a collection of family tree relationships. As you saw in the last exercise, we placed p tags within body tags. When an element is contained inside another element, it is considered the child of that element. The child element is said to be nested inside of the parent element. So here p is nested in body, and the p element is considered a child of the body element, and the body element is considered the parent. You can also see that we've added 2 spaces of indentation using the space bar for better readability. Since there can be multiple levels of nesting, this analogy can be extended to grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and beyond. The relationship between elements and their ancestor and descendant elements is known as hierarchy. Let's consider a more complicated example that uses some new tags. So we see body, div is the child of body, and then we have h1 and p are the 2 children of div. In this example, the body element is a parent. Yep, got you. Understanding HTML hierarchy is important because child elements can inherit behavior and styling from their parent element. You'll learn more about web page hierarchy when you start digging into CSS. Add the paragraph below as a child of the div element. Great. Div element, paragraph is its child, and we run it. Great. Headings in HTML are similar to headings in other types of media. For example, in newspapers, large headings are typically used to capture a reader's attention. Other times, headings are used to describe content, like the title of a movie or an educational article. HTML follows a similar pattern. In HTML, there are 6 different headings, or heading elements. Headings can be used for a variety of purposes, like titling sections, articles, or other forms of content. The following is the list of heading elements available in HTML. They are ordered from largest to smallest in size, so H1 through H3. The following example code uses a headline intended to capture a reader's attention. It uses the largest heading available, the main heading element. Breaking news. So instructions. Now that you know how to structure HTML elements, we'll spend the rest of the lesson building an informational website using some of the most common HTML elements. We've put some elements in to get you started, but you write the rest of the page on your own. Below the H3 heading that says features, add an H2 heading that says habitat. So features and H2 habitat. Awesome. Below the habitat heading, add an H3 heading that says countries with large brown bear populations. Countries with large brown bear populations. H3. Cool. On the next line, add one more H3 heading that says countries with small brown bear populations. Finally, on the next line, add an H2 heading that says media. Cool. Customize your experience. Got it. One of the most popular elements in HTML is the div element. Div is short for division, or a container that divides the page into sections. These sections are very useful for grouping elements in your HTML together. So body, div, H1, why use divs? P, great for grouping elements. Divs don't inherently have a visual representation, but they are very useful when we want to apply custom styles to our HTML elements. Divs allow us to group HTML elements to apply the same styles for all HTML elements inside. We can also style the div element as a whole. You can see how this can be done in the Learn CSS course. Divs can contain any text or other HTML elements, such as links, images, or videos. Remember to always add 2 spaces of indentation when you nest elements inside of divs for better readability. Below the H1 heading that says brown bear, added an opening div tag. Placing the closing div tag after the H3 element that says features. And we'll use the space bar. Can I break the rules, or is it not gonna let me? Oh, I did break the rules. So what? Sorry, you can't tell, but I used tab. So above the H2 element that says habitat, add an opening div tag. h2 habitat. Oops. And then close the div tag h3 element. Above the h2 element that says media, add an opening div tag and a closing one, I'm guessing. Oops. Where's tab? Right there. Cool. Next. Attributes. If you want to expand an element's tag, we can do so using an attribute. Attributes are content added to the opening tag of an element and can be used in several different ways, from providing information to changing styling. Attributes are made up of the following two parts: the name of the attribute, the value of the attribute. One commonly used attribute is the ID. We can use the ID attribute to specify different content, such as divs, and is really helpful when you use an element more than once. IDs have several different purposes in HTML, but for now, we'll focus on how they can help us identify content on our page. When we add an ID to a div, we place it in the opening tag. So div ID intro, h1 introduction. Add an ID attribute with the name introduction to the div tag that's below the brown bear heading. Cool. So ID equals introduction. Add an ID attribute with the value habitat to the opening div tag that has the habitat h2 heading as a child. Cool. Add an ID attribute with the media. Okay, great. ID equals media. Control plus period. How do I do that? Dang. Cannot do it on a Mac. RIP. Excuse me? Is there something I forgot? Did I run it? Okay, it's cool. Displaying text. If you want to display text in HTML, you can use a paragraph or span. Paragraphs contain a block of plain text. Span contains short pieces of text or other HTML. They're used to separate small pieces of content that are on the same line as other content. Take a look at each of the elements in action below. Div h1 technology, div p span self-driving cars are anticipated to replace up to 2 million jobs over the next 2 decades. In the example above, there are 2 different div. The section div contains a p with span self-driving cars. This span element separates self-driving cars from the rest of the text in the paragraph. It's best to use a span element when you want to target a specific piece of content that is in line or on the same line as other text. If you want to divide your content into blocks, it's better to use a div. Below the h2 element that says about brown bears, add p opening and closing tags, and inside of the tags put the following text. So h2 brown bears, brown bears, add p. Cool. Remember to always add 2 spaces of indentation when you nest elements. Very correct. Oops. What am I doing? Oh yeah. Okay. So remember, yep, got you. Run it. Below the h3 element that says features, add a paragraph with the following text. Under the h3 element that says countries with small brown bear populations, add a paragraph with the following text. Hold on now. This, I think I'm indenting wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Remember to always add two spaces of indentation when you nested on the side of divs. Yeah. Didn't need to indent these like that. Oh man. These keyboard shortcuts got me messed up. It's this, right? Am I hitting the wrong? What a tragedy. It's bringing me all the way back. It's not what I wanted to do. All right. Oh, it's that simple. Okay, so where were we? H3 element, countries with small brown bear populations. Uzbekistan is a fun word to say. Styling text. You can also style text using HTML tags. The EM tag emphasizes text, while the strong tag highlights important text. Later, when you begin to style websites, you will decide how you want browsers to display content with EM and strong tags. Browsers, however, have built-in style sheets that will generally style these tags in the following ways: italic for M and bold for strong. Take a look at each style in action. The Nile River strong is the longest river in the world. In this example, blah 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 blah. In the first paragraph that starts the brown bear, emphasize Ursus arctos. That's a cool name. Yeah. In the paragraph under about brown bears, make the words least concern strong tag. Strong. Awesome. Line breaks. The spacing between code and an HTML file doesn't affect the positioning of elements in the browser. If you are interested in modifying the spacing in the browser, you can use HTML's line break element. The line break element is unique because it is only composed of a starting tag. You can use it anywhere within your HTML code, and a line break will be shown in the browser. So the Nile River is the longest river, break in the world, blah blah blah, break, blah blah blah, break, miles. The code in the example above will result in an output that looks like the following, everything on a new line. Add 2 line breaks, BR, after the sentence that ends with least concern. Cool. Unordered lists. In addition to organizing text in paragraph form, you can also display content in an easy-to-read list. In HTML, you can use an unordered list tag UL to create a list of items in no particular order. An unordered list outlines individual list items with a bullet point. The UL element should not hold raw text and won't automatically format raw text into an unordered list of items. Individual list items must be added to the unordered list using the li tag. The li, or list item tag, is used to describe an item in a list. In the example above, the list was created using the UL tag, and all individual list items were added using li tags. The output will look like this: Lime's tortillas chickens. Under the heading that says species, create an unordered list. Do not add any list items to the list just yet. Add the following list items to the unordered list. Arctos. 4 of them. Arctos. Colorus. Horribilis. Nelsoni. Or Nelsoni. Extinct. Ordered lists are like unordered lists, except that each list item is numbered. They're useful when you need to list different steps in a process or rank items from first to last. You can create the ordered list with the OL tag and then add individual list items to the list using LI tags. Great. So under the heading that says countries with large brown bear populations, add an ordered list. And then add these list items: Russia, United States, Canada. equals. Cool. Images. All of the elements you've learned about so far, headings, paragraphs, lists, and spans, share one thing in common. They're composed entirely of text. What if you want to add content to your web page that isn't composed of text, like images? The image tag allows you to add an image to a web page. Most elements require both opening and closing tags, but the image tag is a self-closing tag. Note that the end of the image tag has a /. Self-closing tags may include or omit the final slash. Both will render properly. The image tag has a required attribute called source. The source attribute must be set to the image's source, or the location of the image. In this case, the value of source must be the uniform resource locator, URL, of the image. A URL is the web address or local address where a file is stored. Under the Media H2 heading, add an image. Use the following URL as the source for the image. So under Media, image source equals this. Why does it do that? This. Cool. Look at that brown bear. Look at that sexy bear. Image alts. Part of being an exceptional web developer is making your site accessible to users of all backgrounds. In order to make the web more inclusive, we need to consider what happens when assistive technologies, such as screen readers, come across image tags. The alt attribute, which means alternative text, brings meaning to the images on our sites. The alt attribute can be added to the image tag just like the source attribute. The value of alt should be a description of the image. So, a field of yellow sunflowers. The alt attribute also serves the following purposes. If an image fails to load on a web page, the user can mouse over the area originally intended for the image and read a brief description of the image. This is made possible by the description you provide in the alt attribute. Visually impaired users often browse the web with the aid of screen reading software. When you include the alt attribute, the screen reading software can read the image's description out loud to the visually impaired user. The alt attribute also plays a role in search engine optimization because search engines cannot see the images on websites as they crawl the internet. Having descriptive alt attributes can improve the ranking of your site. If the image on the web page is not one that conveys any meaningful information to a user, the alt attribute should be left empty. Add the alt attribute to the image and include a description. Make sure the description accurately describes the image. Okay, so alt equals a sexy brown bear. Cool. Videos. In addition to images, HTML also supports displaying videos. Like the image element, the video element requires a source attribute with a link to the video source. Unlike the image element, however, the video element requires an opening and closing tag. So video source my video.mp4 width 320, height 240, controls, video not supported. In this example, the video source is my video.mp4. The source can be a video file that is hosted alongside your web page or a URL that points to a video file hosted on another web page. After the source attribute, the width and height attributes are used to set the size of the video displayed in the browser. The controls attribute instructs the browser to include basic video controls such as pausing and playing. The text video not supported between the opening and closing video tags will only be displayed if the browser is unable to load the video. Under the image, create a video tag. And add the following video URL as the source. Be sure to create a closing tag. Already done. Uh-oh, too much confidence. What did I do wrong? After the image element, did you create a video element that contains the provided video URL? Thought I did. Oh, for some reason when you paste, I guess, I don't know, whatever. Define the width of the video as 320 and the height is 240. It was 320. Make sure to also include the controls attribute. I did not finish reading that. There we go. In between the opening and closing video tags, add the phrase video not supported, which will be displayed if the browser is unable to load the video. Great. Oh yeah. Look at this thing. Imagine you're just walking and this comes up on you. Every time I'm hiking in like the dense woods, this is my greatest fear, seeing one of these things. But it's majestic to look at through a computer screen. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so review. Congratulations on completing the first lesson of HTML. You are well on your way to becoming a skilled web developer. This is okay. Let's quiz. Skip the quiz. Preparing for HTML. Now that we've learned about some of the most common HTML elements, it's time to learn how to set up an HTML file. HTML files require certain elements to set up the document properly. We can let web browsers know that we are using HTML by starting our document with a document type declaration. The declaration looks like this: exclamation doc type HTML. This declaration is an instruction, and it must be the first line of code in your HTML document. It tells the browser what type of document to expect, along with what version of HTML is being used in the document. For now, the browser will correctly assume that the HTML in doc type HTML is referring to HTML5, as it is the current standard. In the future, however, a new standard will override HTML5. To make sure your document is forever interpreted correctly, always include doc type HTML at the very beginning of your HTML documents. Lastly, HTML code is always saved in a file with a .html extension. Add the doc type as the first line of code. Cool. The HTML tag. The doc type HTML declaration provides the browser with two pieces of information: the type of document and the HTML version to expect, but it doesn't actually add any HTML structure or content. To create HTML structure and content, we must add opening and closing HTML tags. Anything between the opening HTML and closing HTML tags will be interpreted as HTML code. Without these tags, it's possible that browsers could incorrectly interpret your HTML code. Don't want that. The head. So far, you've done two things to set up the file properly: declared to the browser that your code is HTML with doc type HTML, added the HTML element that will contain the rest of your code. We have added these elements to the Brown Bears page you previously created. Now, let's also give the browser some information about the page itself. We can do this by adding a head element. Remember that the body tag? The head element is part of this HTML metaphor. It goes above our body element. The head element contains the metadata for a web page. Metadata is information about the page that isn't displayed directly on the web page. Unlike the information inside the body tag, the metadata in the head is information about the page itself. You'll see an example of this in the next exercise. The opening and closing head tags typically appear as the first item after your first HTML tag. Place the head element below the opening HTML tag. Page titles. What kind of metadata about the web page can the header element contain? If you navigate to the Codecademy catalog and look at the top of your browser, you'll notice the words All Courses and Tutorials, pipe, Codecademy, which is the title of the web page. A browser's tab displays the title specified in the title tag. The title tag is always inside of the head. So here we see head has a child element title, My Coding Journal. If we were to open a file containing the HTML code in the example above, the browser would display the words My Coding Journal in the title bar or in the tab's title. Add Brown Bears as the title of your web page by using the title element. Oops. Unfortunately, silly me. Silly. Let's go. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see the title of your page in the smaller browser to the right. We'll show you what it would look like in the next exercise. Great. Where does the title appear? Yep, got you. Good work. Unfortunately, blah, 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 blah. So far, we've learned blah, blah, blah. Linking to other web pages. One of the powerful aspects of HTML and the internet is the ability to link to other web pages. You can add links to a web page by adding an anchor element A and including the text of the link in between the opening and closing tags. So A, this is a link to Wikipedia. Close A, wait a minute. Technically, the link in the example above is incomplete. How exactly is the link above supposed to work if there's no URL that will lead users to the actual Wikipedia page? The anchor element in the example above is incomplete without the href attribute. This attribute stands for hypertext reference and is used to link to a path or the address to where a file is located, whether it is on your computer or another location. The paths provided to the href attribute are often URLs. So href and then Wikipedia. In the example above, the href attribute has been set to the value of URL, wikipedia.org. The example now shows the correct use of an anchor element. When reading technical documentation, you may come across the term hyperlink. Not to worry, this is simply the technical term for a link. These terms are often used interchangeably. After the first paragraph, right above the heading that says species, add a link that says learn more. Don't add the URL just yet. So first paragraph, right above the heading species. Where we at? Cool, right here. Don't want that indent. Oops. What did I do wrong? After the first paragraph, or right above the heading that says species. Oh, I didn't make it say anything. Add the following URL to the link. Species. href. Cool. Have you ever clicked on a link and observed the resulting web page open in a new browser window? If so, you can thank the A elements target attribute. The target attribute specifies how a link should open. It's possible that one or more links on your web page link to an entirely different website. In that case, you may want users to read the linked website but hope that they return to your web page. This is exactly when the target attribute is useful. For a link to open in a new window, the target attribute requires a value of blank. The target attribute can be added directly to the opening tag of the anchor element, just like the href attribute. So here we see href Wikipedia brown bear target underscore blank. In the example above, setting the target attribute to underscore blank instructs the browser to open the relevant Wikipedia page in a new window. In this exercise, we've used the terminology open in a new window. It's likely that you are using a modern browser that opens up websites in new tabs rather than new windows. Before the advent of browsers with tabs, additional browser windows had to be opened to view more websites. The target underscore blank attribute, when used in modern browsers, will open new websites in a new tab. In the link that reads learn more, add the target attribute and set it equal to blank. So here we go, learn more, target equals blank. Awesome. Linking to relative page. Thus far, you have learned how to link to external web pages. Many sites also link to internal web pages like home, about, and contact. Before we learn how to link between internal pages, let's establish where our files are stored. When making multi-page static websites, web developers often store HTML files in the root directory or a main folder where all the files for the project are stored. As the size of the project you create grows, you may use additional folders within the main project folder to organize your code. So project folder, about.html, contact.html, index.html. The example above shows 3 different files, about.html, contact.html, and index.html in one folder. HTML files are often stored in the same folder as shown in the example above. If the browser is currently displaying index.html, it also knows that about.html and contact.html are in the same folder. Because the files are stored in the same folder, we can link web pages together using a relative path, so /contact.html. In this example, the A tag is used with a relative path to link from the current HTML file to the contact.html file in the same folder. On the web page, contact will appear as a link. A relative path is a file name that shows the path to a local file on the same website, such as /index.html, versus an absolute path, a full URL like https www codecademy blah blah blah, which is stored in a different folder. The /index.html tells the browser to look for the file in the current folder. Directly below the opening body tag, which is this, within index.html. Yeah, so that's where we are. Add an anchor tag that links to index.html with a relative path. The link should say brown bear. So directly below the opening body tag, okay. Add an anchor tag that links to index.html. Was I paying attention? Barely. Okay, cool. It is a href. That's what I was trying to check. And it needs to link already to the same page. The relative path, brown bear. Under the link to index.html, add an anchor tag that links to aboutme.html. The link should say about me. Notice that there is also another file in the code editor, aboutme.html. Click the link to make sure it works. Let's see. Awesome, it's working. Linking at will. You've probably visited websites where not all links were made up of text. Maybe the links you clicked on were images or some other form of content. So far, we've added links that were made up of only text, like the following. Text-only links, however, would significantly decrease your flexibility as a web developer. Thankfully, HTML allows you to turn nearly any element into a link by wrapping that element with an anchor element. With this technique, it's possible to turn images into links by simply wrapping the image element with an A element. So A href equals this, target blank, source, prickly pear close-up, alt a red prickly pear fruit. In the example above, an image of a prickly pear has been turned into a link by wrapping the outside of the image element with an A element. In index.html, transform the image on your page into a link by wrapping the image element with an anchor element. Set the target attribute so that the link opens in a new window. Your image element should be a nested tag inside your anchor element. Use the same URL as before. So we have this image right here. We're gonna nest this baby right up in this anchor element, and we're gonna make sure that we indent because we're good coders. And we're going to add a href to this link. Boom. And what happened? Something happened. Whatever. Don't need that. Target equals underscore link. Is that everything I need? Let's find out without reading. It wasn't indexed. Transform the image into link. Set the target attributes of the image. I forgot something. What did I forget? Chef target blank and the image. Did you wrap the image element with an anchor tag? I thought I did. Oh, it's because, is it? Hold on. Something went wrong. Where'd it go wrong? Okay. This is where it went wrong. Cool. Linking to same page. At this point, we have all the content we want on our page. Since we have so much content, it doesn't all fit on the screen. How do we make it easier for a user to jump to different portions of our page? When users visit our site, we want them to be able to click a link and have the page automatically scroll to a specific section. In order to link to a target on the same page, we must give the target an ID like this. PID top, this is the top of the page. H1ID bottom, this is the bottom. In this example, the P element is assigned an ID of top, and the H1 element is assigned bottom. An ID element can be added to most elements on a web page. An ID should be descriptive to make it easier to remember the purpose of a link. The target link is a string containing the pound character and the target element's ID. So href equals pound top, href equals pound bottom. In the example above, the links to PID top and H1ID bottom are embedded in an ordered list. These links appear in the browser as a numbered list of links. An ID is especially helpful for organizing content belonging to a div. Under the H1 element that says the brown bear, create an unordered list with the following 3 elements. So where's the brown bear? Right here. Under an H1 element says the brown bear. Create an unordered list with the following 3 list elements. So unordered list. Following 3 elements: introduction, habitat, media. Wrap the text of each list item in the unordered list in an anchor element. Each anchor tag should link to a corresponding div. So A Dang. There we go. So each anchor tag should link to the corresponding div on the page. The A element that contains the text introduction links to introduction. That's with href pound. Are those IDs set up? They look like it. Yep. So cool. White space. The rest of this lesson will focus on some tools developers use to make codes easier to interpret. As the code in an HTML file grows, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep track of how elements are related. Programmers use two tools to visualize the relationship between elements: white space and indentation. Both tools take advantage of the fact that the position of elements in a browser is independent of the amount of white space or indentation in the index.html file. For example, if you wanted to increase the space between two paragraphs on your web page, you would not be able to accomplish this by adding space between the paragraph elements in the index.html file. The browser ignores white space in HTML files when it renders a web page, so it can be used as a tool to make code easier to read and follow. What makes the example below difficult to read? It's all on one line. I'm confused. Where's the body start and end? Where's the paragraph start and end? You have to read the entire line to know what elements are present. Compare the example above to this. Nice and pretty. This example is easier to read because each element is on its own line. While the first example required you to read the entire line of code to identify the elements, this example makes it easy to identify the body tag, and two paragraphs. A browser renders both examples the same way. In the next exercise, you will learn how to use indentation to help visualize nested elements. Use white space to make the code more readable by putting each element on its own line. Oops, it indented for me automatically. Indentation. The second tool web developers use to make the structure of code easier to read is indentation. The spaces are inserted using the space and tab bars on your keyboard. The World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, is responsible for maintaining the style standards of HTML. Okay, this is blah, who cares? Indent the code. Let's do that. Body, indent that. Div, indent that. P, indent it in the div. Div, indent that, and we're good. Comments. HTML files allow you to add comments to your code. Comments begin with the angle bracket, exclamation, hyphen, hyphen, and end with the hyphen, hyphen, angle bracket. Any characters in between will be ignored by your browser. Including comments in your code is helpful for many reasons. They help you and others understand your code. If you decide to come back and review it at a much later date, they allow you to experiment with new code without having to delete old code. So favorite film section, the following is a list of my favorite films. In this example, the comment is used to denote that the following text makes up a particular section of the page. In the example above, a valid HTML element, a paragraph element, has been commented out. This practice is useful when there is a code you want to experiment with or return to in the future. Add a comment to index.html. So feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly? This quote stinks. Next, HTML tags. You now know all of the basic elements and set up you need to structure an HTML page and add different types of content. With the help of CSS, very soon you'll be creating beautiful websites. While some tags have a very specific purpose, such as image and video tags, most tags are used to describe the content that they surround, which helps us modify and style our content later. There are seemingly infinite numbers of tags to use, many more than we've taught. Knowing when to use each one is based on how you want to describe the content of your HTML. Descriptive, well-chosen tags are one key to high-quality web development. A list of available tags is there. And you could review what you've learned, but if you're cool like me, you're not going to do that. So let's go to the next section. Skip for now. What's up next? Next steps. I completed HTML Fundamentals. That was very easy. I guess I should, what time is it? Time is actually moving by pretty slowly, so I don't know. Chat, what should I do? Oh, there's no one here? Great. I'm going to go to tables. It feels a little bit too easy. Learn how to create HTML tables, present data, and organize and format your tables. All right, I should do this. Remember, learn the fundamentals. I know my time feels strapped, but it's super critical that I don't get to the next step and feel like I need to start walking backwards. So, introduction to tables. There are many websites on the internet that display information like stock prices, sports scores, invoice data, and more. This data is tabular in nature, meaning that a table is often the best way of presenting the data. And as part of the course, we'll learn how to use the HTML table element to present information in a two-dimensional table to the users. Let's get started. Take a look at the code in the body of index.html. What new code do you see? Explore with the code in this file and try modifying something at random. So I see a table, T-head, company name, company names, dog, Adams, green, green buds, Dave's burger, let's make it Dave's hot dogs, and Baker's bike shop, Baker's cake shop. That's enough changes. And now we can see green buds, hot dogs, cake shop, and company names, dog. Cool. Create a table. Before displaying data, we must first create the table that will contain the data by using the table element. Table. The table element will contain all of the tabular data we plan on displaying. In index.html, create a table just above the closing body tag. So closing body tag, just above it, we'll indent and then create table. Next up, table rows. In many programs that use tables, the table is already predefined for you, meaning that it contains the rows, columns, and cells that will hold data. In HTML, all of these components must be created. The first step in entering data into the table is to add rows using the table row element tr. Table tr. In the example above, 2 rows have been added to the table, so let's do that, and then tr. I swear my fingers are too big for this keyboard I got. I might have to buy another one. It's very satisfying to type on though, but I need something bigger. What did I do wrong? Oh, wants me to do this, I believe. What's going on right now? Is my keyboard mad at me for making fun of it? That's what it felt like just now. So table data. Rows aren't sufficient to add data to a table. Each cell element must also be defined. In HTML, you can add data using the table data element td. In the example above, 2 data points 73 and 81 were created. Cool. So, wait, I guess I'll read it. Entered it into the one row that exists by adding 2 data points. We created 2 cells of data. If the table were displayed in the browser, it would show a table with 1 row and 2 columns. In the second row, add 3 cells of data. The cells should contain the following data in order. Okay, cool. So, second row. What did I do wrong? Cool. Table headings. Table data doesn't make much sense without titles to describe what the data represents. To add titles to rows and columns, you can use the table heading element th. The table heading element is used just like a table data element, except with a relevant title. Just like table data, a table heading must be placed within a table row. So th scope call Saturday, th scope call Sunday, th scope row temp, retro. What happened in the code above? First, a new row was added to hold the 3 headings: a blank heading, a Saturday heading, and a Sunday heading. The blank heading creates the extra table cell necessary to align the table headings correctly over the data they correspond to. In the second row, 1 table heading was added as a row title, temperature. When rendered, this code will appear similar to the image below. Note also the use of the scope attribute, which can take one of 2 values. Row, this value makes it clear that the heading is for a row, and this column, this value makes it clear that the heading is for a column. HTML code for tables may look a little strange at first, but analyzing it piece by piece helps make the code more understandable. In the first row, add 3 table headings. So 3 table headings, th. Copy this twice, and the heading should contain the following data in order: company name. Oops, didn't copy that right. Company name, number of items to ship, next action. Awesome. What did I do wrong? Maybe not awesome. Okay, now add a scope attribute to each of these headings. So these all should have scope column. you set the scope of the company name heading, the column? Oh, I see. I was being too verbose. Pardon me. Cool. Table borders. So far, the tables you've created have been a little difficult to read because they have no borders. In older versions of HTML, a border could be added to a table using the border attribute and setting it equal to an integer. This integer would represent the thickness of the border, like so. The code in the example above is deprecated, so please don't use it. Let's just ignore that. It's meant to illustrate older conventions you may come across when reading other developers' code. The browser will likely still interpret your code correctly if you use the border attribute, but that doesn't mean the attribute should be used. We use CSS to add style to HTML documents because it helps us to separate the structure of a page from how it looks. You can learn more about CSS in our CSS courses. You can achieve the same table border effect using CSS. Table, TD, border, 1 pixel, solid black. The code in the example above uses CSS instead of HTML to show table borders. We're going to need some more data in the table. Add the following table to the add the following data to the table. Make sure to place it after the second table row. So take that data, go to the second table row, add all that. Let's see what it looks like. For some reason, this is making me run it twice in order to get that check mark, which I don't like. I don't appreciate that. Spanning columns. What if the table contains data that spans multiple columns? For example, a personal calendar could have events that span across multiple hours or even multiple days. Data can span columns using the callSpan attribute. The attribute accepts an integer greater than or equal to 1 to denote the number of columns it spans across. So in this case, we see callSpan 2 out of town will cross over into 2 columns. In the example above, the data out of town spans the Monday and Tuesday table headings using the value 2 for 2 columns. The data back in town appears only under the Wednesday heading. So instructions in index.html span a TD element across 2 columns. So we'll do, I don't know, Miss Sally's Southern. I think we're going to make that her name is also the item she shipped. So call span, oh, well, whatever. I guess the number is going into next action. Make it 2. See what that looks like. Whoa. Push it out there. That's not what was expected. Spanning rows. Data can also span multiple rows using the row span attribute. The row span attribute is used for data that spans multiple rows. Perhaps an event goes on for multiple hours on a certain day. It accepts an integer greater than or equal to 1 to denote the number of rows it spans. So, and here we see TD row span equals 2. In the example above, there are 4 rows. The first row contains an empty cell. Okay, I get it. Index.html span a TD element across 2 rows. Make this one do this. Row span equals 2. Huh. Where is it at? Oh, I guess it corrected it. I don't know. Regardless, table body. Over time, a table can grow to contain a lot of data and become very long. When this happens, the table can be sectioned off so that it is easier to manage. Long tables can be sectioned off using the table body element tbody. The tbody element should contain all of the table's data, excluding the table headings. More on this in a later exercise. So in the example above, all of the table data is contained within a table body element. Note, however, that the headings were also kept in the table's body. We'll change this in the next exercise. Enclose rows 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the table in the tbody element. Enclose rows 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. So ignore row 1. Tbody. Why is the indent off? Is it just me? No. Wait. So table row company name, table row Adams Greenworks, table row Davies Burgers. Yeah, the indentation is off here. It's annoying. Okay, now it looks right. And T-body, these actually all need to get indented. Maybe they did that to remind me of that. Maybe. Close the T-body. Did it work? Yes, it did. Okay, table head. In the last exercise, the table's headings were kept inside of the table's body. When the table's body is sectioned off, however, it also makes sense to section off the table's column headings using the T-head element. In the example above, the only new element is T-head. The table headings are contained inside of this element. Note that the table's head still requires a row in order to contain the table headings. Additionally, only the column headings go under the T-head element. We can use the scope attribute on TH elements to indicate whether a TH element is being used as a row heading or a call heading. So enclose the first row of the table in a T-head element. Okay, table footer. The bottom part of a long table can also be sectioned off using the T-foot element. Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking T-O-fucking D. I don't know why I said that. I'm getting. Okay, add a table footer at the bottom of the table using the T-foot element. So table footer after the body. T-foot. Styling with CSS. Tables by default are very bland. They have no borders. The font color is black, and the typeface is the same type used for other HTML elements. CSS, or cascading style sheets, is a language that web developers use to style the HTML content on a web page. You can use CSS to style tables. Specifically, you can style the various aspects mentioned above. So here we see table THTD with a border of 1px solid black, a font family of Arial or sans serif, and a text align of center. The code in the example above demonstrates just some of the various table aspects that you can style using CSS properties. We've included a .css file containing instructions for styling the HTML content in the index.html file. In style.css, set the font size of all table headings th and table data td to 18 pixels. So here we're in style CS, tables, and what we want is the font size of all table headings right here, and table data to 18 pixels, so font size 18 and table data, should we do them separately or together? Well, I'll do both. So does it matter the order? I think I'll put it here. Font size. Not you. Cool. Review, great job, great job. Up next. Next steps. Tables is completed. Forms and then semantic HTML. Real quick, gonna grab a little bit of extra coffee and throw it in the microwave. So 30-second break. What I really need, I need like some music to play when I go do these coffee breaks. I gotta figure that out, but I'll be right back. Make sure the recording's still working. Looks like it. Awesome. All right. One more sip and then on to forms. Let's go. Okay, introduction. Google. Introduction to HTML forms. Forms are a part of everyday life. When we use a physical form in real life, we write down information and give it to someone to process. Think of the times you've had to fill out information for various applications like a job or a bank account, or dropped off a completed suggestion card. Each instance is a form. Just like a physical form, an HTML form element is responsible for collecting information to send somewhere else. Every time we browse the internet, we come into contact with many forms, and we might not even realize it. There's a good chance that if you're typing into a text field or providing an input, the field that you're typing into is part of a form. In this lesson, we'll go over the structure and syntax of a form and the many elements that populate it. Look over the image. Can you think of any other forms you've interacted with? No, I can't. That's the only one. How a form works. We can think of the internet as a network of computers which send and receive information. Computers need an HTTP request to know how to communicate. The HTTP request instructs the receiving computer how to handle the incoming information. More information can be found in our article about HTTP requests. I'm going to save that because that's interesting to me. The form element is a great tool for collecting information, but then we need to send that information somewhere else for processing. We need to supply the form element with both the location of where the form's information goes and what HTTP request to make. Take a look at the sample form below. So here we see form action example.html method post. In the above example, we've created the skeleton for a form that will send information to example.html as a post request. The action attribute determines where the information is sent. The method attribute is assigned an HTTP verb that is included in the HTTP request. Note, HTTP verbs like post do not need to be capitalized for the request to work, but it's done so out of convention. In the example above, we could have written method equals post and it would still work. The form element can also contain child elements. For instance, it would be helpful to provide a header so that users know what this form is about. We could also add a paragraph to provide even more detail. Let's see an example of this in code. So form, action, example.html, method post, h1 creating a form. P, looks like you want to learn how to create an HTML form. Well, the best way to learn is to play around with it. The example above doesn't collect any user input, but we'll do that in the next exercise. For now, let's practice making the foundation of an HTML form. In the section element, add a form element under the provided comment. So, form. Assign the form with an action attribute with value of /practice.html. A method attribute with a value of post. Right now we have a blank form on a burger site. Let's add some context. Add an h1 inside the form element with text related to the site between the opening and closing h1 tags. So this might be something like h1, h1, awesome burgers, and close it. Add some details to the form by inserting a p element below the h1 element. Good burgers made with love. Cool. Text input. If we want to create an input field in our form, we'll need the help of the input element. The input element has a type attribute, which determines how it renders on the web page and what kind of data it can accept. The first value for the type attribute we're going to explore is text. When we create an input element with type text, it renders a text field that users can type into. Note that the default value of type is text. It's also important that we include a name attribute for the input. Without the name attribute, information in the input won't be sent when the form is submitted. We'll learn we'll explain more about submissions and the submit button later in this exercise. For now, let's examine the following code that produces a text input field. ASMR, right? Okay, so you see input type equals text name first text field. It's inside the form. Here's a screenshot of how the rendered form looks like on a web page for the Chrome browser. Different browsers have different default rendering. When initially loaded, it will be an empty box. After users type into the input element, the value of the value attribute becomes what is typed into the text field. Again, after users type into the input element, the value of the value attribute becomes what is typed into the text field. The value of the value attribute is paired with the value of the name attribute and sent as text when the form is submitted. For instance, if a user typed in important details in the text field created by our input element, imported details here we see in the form, when the form is submitted, the text first text field equals important details is sent to example.html. Because the value of the name attribute is first text field and the value of value is important details, we could also assign a default value for the value attribute so that users have a pre-filled text field when they first see the rendered form, like so. Form action equals example.html, method equals post, input type equals text, name first text field, value equals already pre-filled, which renders already pre-filled. Time to put this knowledge into practice. Instructions. Let's start with creating a login form for our users. Inside the provided form element, add an input element with a type attribute of text. So inside form, right here, add input element type attribute text. Even though we're not submitting the form, let's develop some good habits by giving the input a name attribute with the value of username. Okay. Let's see what happens if we add a value attribute with a value of Davy. Awesome. Let's keep going. Adding a label. In the previous exercise, we created an input element, but we didn't include anything to explain what the input is used for. For a user to properly identify an input, we use the appropriately named label element. More ASMR. The label element has an opening and closing tag and displays text that is written between the opening and closing tags. To associate a label and an input, the input needs an ID attribute. We then assign the for attribute of the label element with the value of the ID attribute of input, like so. So form action is example.html, method is post, label for meal, what do you want to eat? Label end, line break, input type text, name food, ID meal. So, I think I added a closing input for no reason. Regardless, the code above renders what do you want to eat and the form. Look, now users know what the input element is for. Another benefit for using the label element is when this element is clicked, the corresponding input is highlighted/selected. Let's see the label element in action. Add a label element that is associated with the included input element in index.html. Use the for attribute. So once again, add a label element that is associated with the included input element in index.html. So we have the input. We're going to add a label. Is that with opening and closing? Yes, it is. And the element, use the for attribute. So for username. Then add text username within the label element. Right, we could just add the text directly. Yep. After clearing this checkpoint, click on the username label in the web browser. So first clear the checkpoint. Click on the username label in the text browser to see the corresponding input field selected. Cool. Password input. Think about all those times we have to put sensitive information like a password or PIN into a form. We wouldn't want our information to be seen by anyone peeking over our shoulder. Luckily, we have the type password attribute for input. An input type equals password element will replace input text with another character like an asterisk or a dot. The code below provides an example of how to create a password field. Form label for user password, password, input type, password, ID, user password, name, user password. After a user types into the field, it would look like password ... Even though the password field obscures the text of the password when the form is submitted, the value of the text is sent. In other words, if 102 is typed into the password field, user -password equals 102 is sent along with the other information on the form. To complete our login page in index.html, we need a password field. Add an input element under the second label element. So label, where's the first label element? Right here. And what we need to do is we need to add an input element under the second label element. So input, and what's going in here? So add an input element under the second label element, assign the ID to the correct value to associate the second label with this new input. So ID needs to be user PW. Set the newly created inputs elements type attribute to password. Type comes before ID. And set the name attribute to user PW. User password, user PW. Okay. On to the next one. Let me take a sip real quick. We've now gone over two type attributes for input related to text, but we might want our users to type in a number, in which case we can set the type attribute to number. By setting type equals number for an input, we can restrict what users type into the input field to just numbers and a few special characters like hyphen, plus, and period. We can also provide a step attribute which creates arrows inside the input field to increase or decrease by the value of the step attribute. Below is the code needed to render an input field for numbers. So input ID equals years, name years, type number, step 1, which renders years of experience with these number up and down arrows for stepping. In index.html, we started a form for users to make a custom burger. Right now we have a label for patties that needs an associated input element. Since we want users to enter a number, create an input and set the attributes. So first of all, how many patties would you like? It's going to need to go down here. Input. So associate the input to the first label by assigning the correct value to ID. So ID is going to need to be amount. Type equals number. Step equals 1. Name equals amount. Oh, cool. Range input using an input type equals number is great if we want to allow users to type in any number of their choosing, but if we wanted to limit what numbers our users could type, we might consider using a different type value. Another option we could use is setting type to range, which creates a slider. To set the minimum and maximum values of the slider, we assign values to the min and max attribute of the input. We could also control how smooth and fluid this slider works by assigning the step attribute of value. Smaller step values will make the slider move more fluidly, whereas larger step values will make the slider move more noticeably. Take a look at the code to create a slider. So input ID volume, name volume, type range, min 0, max 100, step equals 1. So key elements here is that the type is now range. We've set minimum and maximum values. And we can't move that. The code above renders this. In the example above, every time the slider moves by 1, the value of the input's value attribute changes. Let's give our users an option for how they want to cook their patties. We can do this by adding a slider to the existing form. In the section with class equals cooked, add an input element. So class cooked in this section under the label. How do you want your patty cooked? So I guess I'll do it after the line break. Oh no, they want it rare to well done. Oh, I see. In the section with class, add an input element. Set the ID and name to doneness. Oops. Name equals doneness. Also set the type attribute to range. Type equals range. Since our form is getting long, you might have to scroll down. Already did that. Could have provided that at the beginning. For the newly created input, set the min attribute to 0. The max attribute shall be 5. And the step attribute shall be 0.5. Look at that. Look at this. Get it well done. You're crazy if you're eating a rare burger. Insanity. Checkbox input. So far, the types of inputs we've allowed were all single choices. But what if we presented multiple options to users and allowed them to select any number of options? Sounds like we could use checkboxes. In a form, we would use the input element and set type equals checkbox. Examine the code used to create multiple checkboxes. So here we see a form. Choose your pizza toppings, label for cheese, extra cheese, input, ID cheese, name topping, type, checkbox, value cheese. Another one for pepperoni, pepperoni. And the input is ID, pepperoni, name topping, type, checkbox, value pepperoni. Another one, label for anchovy, anchovy. Input, ID equals anchovy, name topping, type, checkbox, value, anchovy, which renders this. Notice in the example provided, there are assigned values to the value attribute of the checkboxes. These values are not visible in the form itself. That's why it is important that we use an associated label to identify the checkbox. Each input has the same value for the name attribute. Using the same name for each checkbox groups the inputs together. However, each input has a unique ID to pair with a label. All right, time to use checkboxes in our code. Let's do it. Okay, so time to add some toppings in the section with class toppings, which is right here. In this section, there are 2 labels but no associated input elements. Add your code below for the first checkbox. So there's 2 labels but no associated input elements. Add an input element associated with the first label. So I guess labels are intended to be below. Sorry, I'm just a little bit thrown off because whatever, regardless. I mean, because it says first, second, third here. Time to add some toppings in the section with the class toppings. There are 2 labels, but no associated input elements. Add an input element associated with the first label. The created input should have an ID set to lettuce. A name with the value of topping. A type set to checkbox. A value of lettuce. Did you create an input with an ID of lettuce? Oh, I made it capital. Add another input element associated with the second label. So input ID equals tomato. Type equals checkbox. Name equals topping. Value equals tomato. Close that properly. 2 choices are good, but it would be better to have even more. Add another input type equals checkbox and label pair. Assign the name of the input to topping. So equals pickles. Type, so well, first name equals topping. Type equals checkbox, and the value equals pickles. Below that, let's create the label for pickles. Put pickles on it, and then close the label. Lovely label. Gosh. All right, is that everything I need? Awesome. Let's keep going. Radio button input. Checkboxes work well if we want to present users with multiple options and let them choose one or more of the options. However, there are cases where we want to present multiple options and only allow for one selection, like asking users if they agree or disagree with the terms and conditions. Let's look over the code used to create radio buttons. Form. What is the sum of 1 plus 1? Input type radio, ID 2, name answer, value 2, label for 2 is 2. And then line break, we see an input type radio, ID 11, name answer, value 11, label for 11 is 11. So which renders what is the sum of 1 plus 1? And you have 2 or 1, 1, which is clearly the correct answer. Notice from the code snippet, radio buttons like checkboxes do not display their value. We have an associated label to represent the value of the radio button. To group radio buttons together, we assign them with the same name, and only one radio button from that group can be selected. Let's see this in action by creating our own radio buttons. We can give our users the option to make the burger into a cheeseburger. Let's use radio buttons for that. In section element with a class of cheesy, there are two labels that don't have any associated input elements. Add an input element associated with the first label. So we're looking for cheesy. What would you like, or would you like to add cheese? Add your first radio button below. So in the section element class cheesy, there are two labels that don't have associated input elements. Add an input element. Then ID equals yes. Type equals radio. Name equals cheesy. And value equals yes. Oh, that was only one. Oh, but cool. I definitely want cheese on that. Awesome. Now add another input element to give users another choice. The wrong choice. The created input should have an ID set to no. Input ID equals no. Type equals radio. Name equals cheese. Value equals no. And then close it. Drop down list. Radio buttons are great if we want our users to pick one option out of a few visible options. But imagine if we have a whole list of options. This situation could quickly lead to a lot of radio buttons to keep track of. An alternative solution is to use a drop-down list to allow our users to choose one option from an organized list. Here's the code to create a drop-down menu. So we see form, label for lunch, what's for lunch, select ID equals lunch, name lunch, and then option value equals pizza, pizza, option value equals curry, curry, option value equals salad, salad, option value equals ramen, and tacos, and so forth, which renders what's for lunch in this drop-down menu. And if we click on the field containing the first option, the list is revealed. Notice in the code that we're using the current select, or using the element select to create the drop-down list. To populate the drop-down list, we add multiple option elements, each with a value attribute. By default, only one of these options can be selected. The text rendered is the text included between the opening and closing option tags. However, it is the value of the value attribute that is used in form submission. Notice the difference in the text and value capitalization. When the form is submitted, the information from this input field will be sent using the name of the select and the value of the chosen option. For instance, if a user selected pizza from the drop-down list, the information will be sent as lunch equals pizza. Let's now give our users a choice of buns using a drop-down list. In section element of the class of bun type, right here, there is a label that we can associate with a select element with. Add a select element with the name of bun and an ID of bun. Does it have an opening and closing? Yeah, it does. Name equals bun, ID equals bun, close it, fully close it. Inside the select element, add 3 options. Is option self-closing? No, it's not. The first option should have a value of sesame. And display the text sesame on the web page. The second option should have a value of potato. And display the text potato on the web page. The third option can be a value that you choose and display text relevant to the value. Make sure it's not empty. So I thought sesame was the clear right answer, but we're gonna add in brioche, which is always the clear right answer for bread, always. Although I would be interested in trying a, is it pumpernickel? What's the brown bread that you get at Cheesecake Factory or Outback Steakhouse? Whatever it is, I need a burger with that on it. Or, you know what I'm saying. Let's keep going. Which type of bone would you like? It's coming along though. I haven't really been looking at the display, but it's coming along. Data list input. Even if we have an organized drop-down list, if the list has a lot of options, it could be tedious for users to scroll through the entire list to locate one option. That's where using the data list element comes in handy. The data list is used with an input type equals text element. The input creates a text field that users can type into and filter options from the data list. Let's go over a concrete example. So here we see a label for a city, ideal city to visit, input type text, list cities, ID city, name city, and then we have a data list of ID equals cities, option, value equals New York City, Tokyo, Barcelona, Mexico, and so on. Notice in the code above, we have an input that has a list attribute. Input list attribute. The input is associated with the data list via the inputs list attribute and the ID of the data list. From the code provided, the following form is rendered, and when the field is selected, you can see the drop down pop up. While select and data list share some similarities, there are some major differences. In the associated input element, users can type in the input fields to search for a particular option. If none of the options match, the user can still use what they typed in. When the form is submitted, the value of the input's name and the value of the option selected or what the user typed in is sent as a pair. Now it's time to make a data list of our own. Time to add some sauce. Users might get creative with what sauce they choose to put, so let's use the data list element. In the section element with a class of sauce selection, which is right there, we already have the label and input set up. Add a data list element with an ID of sauces. So the label, what type of sauce would you like? Input type text, list sauces, ID sauce, name sauce, add the code below. And this is not indented, right? Yeah, it's all in the same line. So data list. How do we do this again? Okay. ID equals sauces. Close it. Fill it up with some options. Add a data list element with an ID of sauces. Oh, I did a little too much. But so now inside the data list element, add 3 options. The first option should have a value of ketchup. The second one should have a value of mayo. And the third ought to have a value that you choose and display text relevant. Make sure it's not empty. We're going to go with barbecue, which I don't know how to spell, so we're going to do BBQ. Now we can see, cool. Text area element. An input element with type text, an input element with type equals text creates a single row input field for users to type in information. However, there are cases where users need to write in more information, like a blog post. In such cases, instead of using an input element, we could use the text area element. The text area element is used to create a bigger text field for users to write more text. We can add the attributes rows and calls to determine the amount of rows and columns for the text area. Take a look. Form label for blog, new blog post, text area ID blog, name blog, rows 5, calls 30. In the code above, an empty text area that is 5 rows by 30 columns is rendered to the page like so. New blog post. If we wanted an even bigger text field, we could click and drag on the bottom right corner to expand it. When we submit the form, the value of text area is the text written inside the box. If we want to add a default value to text area, we would include it within the opening and closing tags like so. I feel like this is how YouTubers talk, like they just, you know what I'm saying? And then you go here. It's fun though, it's fun. It keeps me energized. Focus. If we want it, so when we submit the form, the value of text area is the text written inside the box. If we want to add a default value to text area, we would include it within the opening and closing tags like so. Text area, adding default text, close text area. This code will render a text area that contains pre-filled text, adding to default text. But don't just take our word for it, let's test it out. We covered a lot of options, but users might still have other ideas. Let's make use of a text area element to give users more freedom. In section element with a class of extra info, we have provided a label element. Add a text area with the following attributes. So we have this label for extra, anything else you want to add, and we're going to add a text area. The following attributes. ID equals extra, name equals extra, rows will be 3, calls will be 40. Now add some default text. You may add any text you want, but it cannot be blank. Anything else you want to add, make it delicious. Delicious. Oops. Add an exclamation mark. Cool. Submit form. Remember, the purpose of a form is to collect information that will be submitted. That's the role of the submit button. Users click on it when they are finished with filling out information in the form and they're ready to send it off. Now that we've gone over how to create various input elements, let's now go over how to create a submit button. To make a submit button in a form, we're going to use a reliable input element and set the type to submit. For instance, form input type equals submit, value equals send, which renders send. Notice in the code snippet that the value assigned to the input shows up as text on the submit button. If there isn't a value attribute, the default text submit shows up on the button. Now, let's add this element to make our forms complete. At the bottom of the form, inside the element section, class equals submission. So at the bottom of the form, class submission, add a submit button using the input element. So, yeah, input, what is it? Type, type, submit, value, send, and at the bottom of the form, inside the section, add a submit button. Text inside the button should be submit. So, type equals submit, and it says submit. Cool. Review. Awesome. Let's keep on moving. Introduction to HTML form validation. Ever wonder how a login page actually works, or why the combination of a username and password grants you access to a website? The answers lie in validation. Validation is the concept of checking user-provided data against the required data. There are different types of validation. One type is server-side validation. This happens when data is sent to another machine, typically a server, for validation. An example of this type of validation is the usage of a login page. The form on the login page accepts username and password input, then sends the data to a server that checks that the pair matches up correctly. On the other hand, We use client-side validation if we want to check the data on the browser, the client. This validation occurs before data is sent to the server. Different browsers implement client-side validation differently, but it leads to the same outcome. Shared among the different browsers are the benefits of using HTML5's built-in client-side validation. It saves us time from having to send information to the server and wait for the server to send back confirmation or rejection of the data. This can also help us protect our server from malicious code or data from a malicious user. It also allows us to quickly give feedback to users for specific fields rather than having them fill in a form again if the data they input into the form was rejected. In this lesson, we'll learn how to add some validation checks to our forms. Next, requiring an input. Sometimes we have fields in our forms which are not optional, i.e., there must be information provided before we can submit it. To enforce this rule, we can add the required attribute to an input element. Take, for example, form action example.html, method equals post, label for allergies. Do you have any dietary restrictions? Label end break input ID allergies, name allergies, type text required, input type submit, value submit. So again, requiring an input. Sometimes we have fields in our forms which are not optional, i.e., there must be information provided before we can submit. To enforce this rule, we can add the required attribute to an input element. Got you. This renders a text box, and if we try to submit the form without filling it out, we get this message. Please fill out this field. The styling of the message varies from browser to browser. The picture above depicts the message in a Chrome browser. We'll also continue to show these messages as they appear in Chrome in later exercises. Let's see how it shows up in your browser. Currently in the provided form, the user can submit it without putting any values inside the input field. So form is right here. Let's change that by adding a required attribute to the existing input. So we have these inputs, type number, name, guess, ID, guess, and input type submit, submission. Okay, so what we need to do is make this required. Set a minimum and maximum. Another built-in validation we can use is to assign a minimum or maximum value for a number field, i.e. input type equals number and input type equals range. To set a minimum acceptable value, we use the min attribute and assign a value. On the flip side, to set a maximum acceptable value, we assign the max attribute a value. Let's see this in code. So form action example.html, method post, label for guests, enter number of guests, input ID equals guests, name guests, type number, min 1, max 4, input type submit, value submit. If a user tries to submit an input that is less than 1, a warning will appear. Value must be greater than or equal to 1. A similar message will appear if Sorry, I'm just trying to see why. I thought you needed a step value for these arrows. Regardless, a similar message will appear if a user tries to input a number greater than 4. Let's now see this action. Time to enforce the rules of the guessing game. In the opening input tag, set the min attribute to 1, the max attribute to 10. So input type number, name guess, ID guess required. Right? Rules of the guessing game. In the opening input tag, set min attribute to 1. Okay. Min equals 1. Max equals 10. The value must be less than or equal to 10. Cool. Checking text length. In the previous exercise, we were able to use min and max to set acceptable minimum and maximum values in a number field. But what about text fields? There are certainly cases where we wouldn't want our users typing more than a certain number of characters. Think about the character cap for messages on Twitter. We might even want to set a minimum number of characters. Conveniently, there are built-in HTML5 validations for these situations. To set a minimum number of characters for a text field, we add the min length attribute and a value to set a minimum value. Similarly, to set the maximum number of characters for a text field, we use the max length attribute and set a maximum value. Let's take a look at these attributes in code. Form action example.html, method post, label for summary, summarize your feelings in less than 250 characters, input ID summary, name summary, type text, min length 5, max length 250, required, input type equals submit, value submit. If a user tries to submit the form with less than the set minimum, this message appears. Please lengthen this text to 5 characters or more. You're currently using 2. And if a user tries to type in more than the maximum allowed number of characters, they don't get a warning message, but they can't type it in. Let's add this validation to our form. For the login form, we want our users to have usernames that are at least 3 characters and at most 15. Let's add this validation to our current form. To the input with an ID of username, add the following attributes and values. So input ID username, and we're going to add min length equals 3, max length equals 15. See how it goes. So now that's username. I'm going to make it 3. Sorry. Lengthen it. Nope. We also want passwords to have at least 8 characters and at most 15. So in the opening input tag that has an ID of password or PW, input PW, min length equals 8, and max length equals 15. Great. Matching a pattern. In addition to checking the length of a text, we could also add a validation to check how the text was provided. For cases where we want user input to follow specific guidelines, we use the pattern attribute and assign it a regular expression or regex. Regular expressions are a sequence of characters that make up a search pattern. If the input matches the regex, the form can be submitted. Let's say we wanted to check for a valid credit card number, a 14 to 16 digit number. We could use the regex 0 to 9, 14 to 16, which checks that the user provided only numbers and that they entered at least 14 digits and at most 16 digits. To add this to a form, we see form action example.html method post, label for payment, credit card number, no spaces, input ID payment, name payment, type text, required pattern equals 0 to 9, 14, 16. So inside the straight brackets is the is the types of characters we're expecting. We're expecting numbers 0 to 9. And inside the curly braces is the length, where we set it between 14 and 16. With the pattern in place, users can't submit the form with a number that doesn't follow the regex. When they try, they'll see a validation message like so. Please match the requested format. If you want to find out more about regex, read more at the docs regex entry to see it in practice. Let's use the pattern attribute in our HTML. We might also want to limit usernames to only letters and numbers and not special characters like exclamation or at. To add this validation, add a pattern attribute and set it to A to Z and capital A to capital Z and 0 to 9 plus in the first input element. So here we go. First input element, the pattern attribute right here, username, da da da. Okay, required came before the min and max length. Interesting. So pattern attribute equals A to Z, big A to big Z, 0 to 9 plus. So let's keep it going and review. Cool, that was form validation. So the basic ideas, right, are setting min and max lengths, setting certain things to be required, and setting certain things to, what was the last one we just did? Oh yeah, using regexes to determine what the input can be. Up next, what we got? Next steps, you've completed HTML forms. What's next? Semantic HTML. Okay, before we get into this, once again, time for the coffee break, the valued, the praised, the prized coffee break. All right, peace. Just a random thought. You ever wonder, like, you ever put something in the microwave and then when you open it up, you see like a fly come out or something? This didn't just happen, but it's happened before. And I always wondered, like, what does that feel like? Because the fly lived. And in the one experience that I remember specifically, like, could you even imagine? Yeah, it must be an insane feeling. Okay, learn HTML, semantic HTML. Learn how to use semantic HTML to create cleaner, more accessible web pages. So, introduction to semantic HTML. Hold on, sorry. Gotta get the slippers on, you know. So, when building web pages, we use a combination of non-semantic HTML and semantic HTML. The word semantic means related to meaning. So semantic elements provide information about the content between the opening and closing tags. By using semantic HTML, we select HTML elements based on their meaning, not on how they are presented. Elements such as div and span are not semantic elements since they provide no context as to what is inside of those tags. For example, instead of using a div element to contain our header information, we could use a header element, which is used as a heading section. By using a header tag instead of a div, we provide context as to what information is inside of the opening and closing tag. Why use semantic HTML? Accessibility. Semantic HTML makes web pages accessible for mobile devices and for people with disabilities as well. This is because screen readers and browsers are able to interpret the code better. SEO. It improves the website SEO, or search engine optimization, which is the process of increasing the number of people that visit your web page. With better SEO, search engines are better able to identify the content of your website and weigh the most important content appropriately. Easy to understand. Semantic HTML also makes the website's source code easier to read for other web developers. To better understand this, you can think of comparing non-semantic HTML to going into a store with no signs on the aisles. Since the aisles aren't labeled, you don't know what products are in those aisles. However, stores that do have signs for each aisle make it a lot easier to find the items you need, just like semantic HTML. So here we see we could just use divs for that, a div for that, a div for everything, or we could do a header with a nav, and then next we could have an article with a figure, and at the bottom we could have a footer. Header and nav. Let's take a look at some semantic elements that assist in the structure of a web page. A header is a container, usually for either navigational links or introductory content containing H1 to H6 headings. The example below shows header in action. So header, H1, everything you need to know about pizza. This can be compared to the code below, which uses a div tag instead of a header. So div with an ID of header, and H1, everything you need to know about pizza. By using a header tag, our code becomes easier to read. It is much easier to identify what is inside of the H1's parent tags, as opposed to a div tag, which would provide no details as to what was inside of the tag. A nav is used to define a block of navigation links such as menus and tables of contents. It is important to note that nav can be used inside of the header element but can also be used on its own. Let's take a look at the example below. Header, nav, ul, li, a, href. So let me say it just to cement the concept. So header, nav, unordered list with a list item, anchor, href equals pound home, home, and then another list item, anchor, href equals pound about. By using nav as a way to label our navigation links, it will be easier for not only us, but also for web browsers and screen readers to read the code. Now that we've learned about the header and nav elements, let's add them into our code. In the code editor, find the div ID equals header, right here, tag and change it to header. And also have to change the corresponding tag. Now find the div ID equals nav and change it to nav. Change that right there to nav, and also change the corresponding closer to nav. Main and footer. Two more structural elements are main and footer. These elements, along with nav and header, help describe where an element is located based on conventional web development standards. The element main is used to encapsulate the dominant content within a web page. This tag is separate from the footer and the nav of a web page, since the elements don't contain the principal content. By using main as opposed to a div element, screen readers and web browsers are better able to identify that whatever is inside of the tag is the bulk of the content. So how does main look when incorporated into our code? That's a great question. Here we see main, header, H1 types of sports, and header, article, H3 baseball, P, NP, end article, end main. As we see above, main contains an article and header tag with child elements that hold the most important information related to the page. The content at the bottom of the subject information is known as the footer. indicated by the footer element. The footer contains information such as contact, copyright, terms of use, sitemap references to top of page links. For example, footer with a P, email me at Cody@Code Academy. In the example above, the footer is used to contain contact information. The footer tag is separate from the main element and typically located at the bottom of the content. In the code editor, find the div id equals main tag and change it to main. So div id main, change that to main. Also change the corresponding closer to say main. And I'm assuming what's coming next will be the footer. Change this to footer. And change this to footer. Dang it, man. Article and section. Now that we've covered the body of semantic HTML, let's focus on what can go in the body. That's a confusing way to word it. The two elements we're going to focus on now are section and article. Section defines elements in a document such as chapters, headings, or any other area of the document with the same theme. For example, content with the same theme such as articles about cricket can go under a single section. A website's homepage could be split into sections for the introduction, news items, and contact information. Here's an example of how to use section. So we see section, H2, fun facts about cricket, and section. In the code above, we created a section element to encapsulate the code. In section, we added a H2 element as a heading. The article element holds content that makes sense on its own. Article can hold content such as articles, blogs, comments, magazines, etc. An article tag would help someone using a screen reader understand where the article content that might contain a combination of text, images, audio, etc. begins and ends. Here's an example of how to use article. So here we see section, the heading, the article with the paragraph, ending article, and the section. In the code above, the article element containing a fact about cricket was placed inside of the section element. It is important to note that a section element could also be placed in an article element depending on the context. In the code, find and replace div id section with section. Div id section. This is a section with a H2 and a P. So a header and a paragraph. Change this to section. Now encapsulate the H2 and P tag with article. And make sure that these are properly indented. The aside element. The aside element is used to mark additional information that can enhance another element but isn't required in order to understand the main content. This element can be used alongside other elements such as article or section. Some common uses of the aside element are for bibliographies, endnotes, comments, pull quotes, editorial sidebars, additional information. Here's an example of aside being used alongside article. So we see article, First World War, blah, 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 end article, then an aside with a P. Babe Ruth once stated, heroes get remembered, but legends never die. As shown above, the information within the article is important content. Meanwhile, the information within the aside enhances the information in the article, but it's not required in order to understand it. So here we see remove the div id equals aside, change it to aside, change the closer to aside. See how that looks. Interesting. It doesn't actually change the look on the page. Figure and fig caption. With aside, we learned that we can put additional information next to a main piece of content. But what if we wanted to add an image or illustration? That is where figure and fig caption come in. Figure is an element used to encapsulate media such as an image, illustration, diagram, code snippet, etc., which is referenced in the main flow of the document. Here we see figure with an image of a source equals overwatch.jpg. In this code, we created a figure element so that we can encapsulate our image tag. In figure, we use the image tag to insert an image onto the web page. We use the source attribute within the image tag so that we can link the source of the image. It's possible to add a caption to the image by using fig caption. Fig caption is an element used to describe the media in the figure tag. Usually, fig caption will go inside figure. This is different than using a P element to describe the content. If we decide to change the location of figure, the paragraph tag may get displaced from the figure while a fig caption will move with the figure. This is useful for grouping an image with a caption. I didn't really digest that, so let me read it again. First of all, let me take a sip. Okay. In that code up there, I created a figure element so that we can encapsulate our image tag. In figure, We use the image tag to insert an image onto the web page. We use the source attribute, got you. It's possible to add a caption by using fig caption. Fig caption is an element used to describe the media in the figure tag. Usually fig caption will go inside figure. This is different than using a p element to describe the content. If we decide to change the location of figure, the paragraph tag may get displaced from the figure, while a fig caption will move with the figure. This is useful for grouping an image with a caption. So here we see figure, image, Overwatch, fig caption. This picture shows characters from Overwatch, and fig caption and figure. In the example above, we added a fig caption into the figure element to describe the image from the previous example. This helps group the figure content with the fig caption content. While the content in figure is related to the main flow of the document, its position is independent. This means that you can remove it or move it somewhere else without affecting the flow of the document. Creating an opening and closing figure tag under the closing section tag. So opening, closing figure under closing section right here. Figure. Add an image by using the image tag within figure. Image source equals, and I think images don't oh no, images do have closing tags, I believe, because the alt text goes inside of it, right? No, son, you done messed up. Whoa, look at this dog. That's crazy. Create a fig caption under the image and describe the image. Fig caption. Majestic, colorful, luminescent, which I don't know how to spell either. Fig caption. Oh, I didn't even write that it was a dog. Audio and attributes. Now that we learned about text-based content, let us dig into audio. Surely everyone needs audio. How else would you listen to your Korean hip-hop? Man, these jokes are falling flat on the ground. Everyone knows it's called K-pop. The audio element is used to embed audio content into a document. Like video, audio uses source to link the audio source. Audio source equals I am an audio file .mp3, type equals audio/mp3. In this example, we created an audio element, then we created a source element to encapsulate our audio link. In this case, I am an audio file .mp3 is our audio file. Then we specified the type by using type and named what kind of audio it is. Although not always necessary, it's recommended that we state the type of audio, as it helps the browser identify it more easily and determine if that type of audio file is supported by the browser. We linked our audio file into the browser, but now we need to give it controls. This is where attributes come in. Attributes provide additional information about an element. Attributes allow us to do many different things to our audio file. Sorry, I'm trying to get this in a comfortable position so I can sit comfortably. Am I comfortable? Yes, I am. So, attributes allow us to do many different things to our audio file. There are many attributes for audio, but today we're going to be focusing on controls and source. Controls automatically displays the audio controls into the browser's display and mute. Source specifies the URL of the audio file. As you might have noticed, we already used the source attribute in the example code above. Most attributes go in the opening tag of audio. For example, here's how we could add both autoplay functionality and audio controls. With audio autoplay controls, you can find other attributes here. In the code editor, create an audio tag with the attribute controls directly under the commented line. So, audio controls, add a source for the audio inside the audio tag by using this code. So, yeah, put the source, copy that, and use this URL. What do you guys think the dog bark will sound like? Oh yeah, I don't have the audio connected, so I get to hear it. And you'll never know what that sounded like. Next, video and embed. As demonstrated in the previous exercise, media content can be a useful addition to a website. By using a video element, we can add videos to our website. The video element makes it clear that a developer is attempting to display a video to the user. Some attributes that can alter video playback include Controls. When added in, a play pause button will be added onto the video along with volume control and a full screen option. Autoplay. The attribute which results in a video automatically playing as soon as the page is loaded. Loop. This attribute results in the video continuously playing on repeat. Below is an example of video being used with the controls attribute. So video source equals coding.mp4, controls, video not supported, close video, tag. In the code above, a video file named coding.mp4 is being played. The video not supported will only show up if the browser is unable to display the video. Another tag that can be used to incorporate media content into a page is the embed tag, which can embed any media content including videos, audio files, and GIFs from an external source. This means that websites that have an embed button have some form of media content that can be added to other websites. The embed tag is a self-closing tag, unlike the video element. Note that embed is a deprecated tag and other alternatives such as video, audio, and image should be used in its place, but it is being taught for legacy purposes. Below we'll take a look at embed being used in action. So here we see embed, source, download GIF. In the example above, embed is being used to add in a GIF from a local file known as download.gif. Embed can be used to add local files as well as media content straight from some other websites. 1. Add the following video URL with the attribute controls and wrap it in an opening and closing video tag. In between the opening and closing video tag, you can add a text that will show up if the video is unable to load. This text is helpful for screen readers as well. So create the video here. Video. Video not working. Video and attribute control. So source. Oh wait. Add the following video URL with the attribute and wrap it in opening and closing video tag. So just okay, I have it right. The way it said that was confusing. Source and controls. Look at this dog. Whoa, this music was loud. Add the following GIF into your code using the embed tag and the source attribute. Okay. Nice. Review. Congrats on learning semantic HTML. And that takes us through all of these HTML lessons. Next up will be, this is great. I love it. No, I don't want to do this. No. Just leave me alone. Okay, cool. What's next? Alright, I don't need any of this right now. What I need is CSS KISS, as I like to call it, that I just made up, but I'm sure somebody else calls it too. It's actually a nice name, KISS, like for a coding language, and it's the beauty, it's the language of visuals. I don't know why people don't call it that more. Anyway, I'm doing good on time. It says this course will take 2 hours, but honestly, after the course I just took, like all of what I just did would have been said to take 6 hours. So honestly, let's go to the catalog, HTML and CSS. Only want the freeze. Learn CSS, and let's just do the full thing. Let's go. And I think I'll be able to do it in time. I have 2 hours before I have a meeting, so real quick, gonna grab some coffee and then I'll hop back in. I know this is really random, but calling CSS Kiss, just got that T-Pain song stuck in my head. Kiss Kiss with Chris Brown. And for years, I've thought that the hook to that song was, she want that Laffy Taffy, that kiss kiss. And I just put together in my head, he's saying she want that lovey dovey, that kiss kiss, which makes a lot more sense. It doesn't really have anything to do with this, but top of mind. All right, let's start the course. Oh yeah, so I've done some of this in the past. Let me go to beautiful syllabus. Like I told you, it's like a big flashback for me working with this stuff. Why isn't it loading? Because, you know, I worked on this same stuff a while ago, but now we're reviewing and making sure that the concepts are still in my head somewhere. Intro to CSS. Okay, let's get comfortable. While HTML is the fundamental structure of every web page, it can be visually unappealing on its own. Cascading style sheets, or CSS, is a language web developers use to style the HTML content on a web page. If you're interested in modifying colors, font types, font sizes, images, element positioning, and more, CSS is the tool for the job. In this lesson, you'll learn how to set up your CSS file structure and select which HTML elements you wish to style. Okay, take a look at the code in index.html and observe how it displays in the browser to the right. This is plain HTML without any styling. Take a quick look at the power of CSS. Copy and paste the following line of code into line 5. Right here. Whoa. That actually is pretty impressive. Next, CSS anatomy. The diagram on the right shows two different methods or syntaxes for writing CSS code. The first syntax shows CSS applied as a rule set, while the second shows it written as an inline style. Two different methods of writing CSS may seem a bit intimidating at first, but it's not as bad as it looks. So here we see rule set, so selector, P, color blue, declaration block, P, color blue, declaration, P, color blue. And then we see CSS inline style, opening tag, P with style equals color blue, attribute P style equals color blue, attribute P. So in one, we're dealing with the rule set, and this is if you put it in line. Obviously, this looks like, I'm just going to say that inline looks more intuitive, whereas the rule set looks a little bit more intimidating, right? What are these curly braces here? What are they doing here? We haven't learned about these yet, right? Let's keep reading. Both methods contain common features in their anatomy. Notice how both syntaxes contain a declaration. Declarations are the core of CSS. They apply a style to the selected element. Here, the P element has been selected in both syntaxes and will be styled to display the text in blue. Understanding that a declaration is used to style a selected element is key to learning how to style HTML documents with CSS. The terms below explain each of the labels in the diagram on the right. Rule set terms. Selector. The beginning of the rule set used to target the element that will be styled. So here with the selector is P. Declaration block. The code in between and including the curly braces is the declaration block that contains the CSS declarations. Declaration, the group name for a property and a value pair that applies a style to the selected element. Property, the first part of the declaration that signifies what visual characteristics of the element is to be modified, and then finally the value, the second part of the declaration that signifies the value of the property. Inline style terms, opening tag, the start of an HTML element. This is the element that will be styled. Attribute, the style attribute is used to add CSS inline styles to an HTML element. So here we see style equals color blue. Declaration, the group name for a property and value pair that applies a style to the selected element. Property, the first part of the declaration that signifies what visual characteristic of the element is to be modified. And then finally value, the second part of the declaration that signifies the value of the property Don't worry about memorizing all of these. You will get acquainted with them more and more as the course progresses. Feel free to come back and use this exercise as a reference later on. So study the diagrams. No. Inline styles. Although CSS is a different language than HTML, it's possible to write CSS code directly within HTML code using inline styles. To style an HTML element, you can add the style attribute directly to the opening tag. After you add the attribute, you can set it equal to the CSS styles you'd like applied to that element. So here we see P style color red. I'm learning to code. The code in the example above demonstrates how to use inline styling. The paragraph element has a style attribute within its opening tag. Next, the style attribute is set equal to color red, which will set the color of the paragraph text to red within the browser. If you'd like to add more than one style with inline style, simply keep adding to the style attribute. Make sure to end the styles with a semicolon. Here we see color red, semicolon, font size 20 pixels, semicolon. It's important to know that inline styles are a quick way of directly styling an HTML element, but are rarely used when creating websites. But you may encounter circumstances where inline styling is necessary, so understanding how it works and recognizing it in HTML code is good knowledge to have. Soon you'll learn the proper way to add CSS code. In index.html, use inline styling to set the color of the first paragraph P element to green. So style equals color green, and now it's green. Internal style sheet. As previously stated, inline styles are not the best way to style HTML elements. If you wanted to style, for example, multiple H1 elements, you'd have to add inline styling to each element manually. In addition, you would also have to maintain the HTML code when additional H1 elements are added. Fortunately, HTML allows you to write CSS code in its own dedicated section with a style element nested inside of the head element. The CSS code inside the style element is often referred to as an internal style sheet. An internal style sheet has certain benefits and use cases over inline styles, but once again, it's not best practice. We'll get there, we promise. Understanding how to use internal style sheets is nonetheless helpful knowledge to have. To create an internal style sheet, a style element must be placed inside of the head element right here. So head style. After adding opening and closing style, come on, scroller. Style tags in the head section, you can begin writing CSS code. So style P, color red, font size 20 pixels. The CSS code in the example above changes the color of all paragraph text to red and also changes the size of the text to 20 pixels. Note how the syntax of the CSS code matches for the most part the syntax used for inline styling. The main difference is that you can specify which elements to apply the styling. Let's move the inline style that was added to the paragraph into an internal style sheet. Start by adding an empty style element in the head of index.html. Now, I forget if it should go above title, but regardless, I guess we'll place it below title. So, style, opening, closing, right? Yeah. Style, close style. So I did this part. Inside of the style element, add a CSS rule set targeting the paragraph, the P element. You can leave the declaration block empty for now. So P. Next, place just the declaration from the inline style into the empty declaration block in the inline style sheet. So place just the declaration from the inline style into the empty declaration block in the inline style sheet. So just the declaration is this. Finally, delete the inline style from the P element. Notice how the styling works the same in the style sheet as it did in the inline element. Bye-bye. External style sheet. Developers avoid mixing code by storing HTML and CSS code in separate files. HTML files contain only HTML code and CSS files contain only CSS code. You can create an external style sheet by using the .css file name extension like so, style.css. With an external style sheet, you can write all the CSS code needed to style a page without sacrificing the readability and maintainability of your HTML file. Take a look at index.html. Cut the CSS code rule set in between the opening and closing style tags and paste it directly into the file called style.css. So cut the CSS code rule set between the tags. So just this. Did that get selected? Not sure. Paste it directly into the file. Whoa, it looks all funky. That's better. The font changes didn't take effect. Click the next button to find out why. Linking the CSS file. Perfect. We successfully separated structure HTML from styling CSS, but the web page still looks bland. Why? When HTML and CSS codes are in separate files, the files must be linked. Otherwise, the HTML file won't be able to locate the CSS code, and the styling will not be applied. You can use the link element to link HTML and CSS files together. The link element must be placed within the head of the HTML file, right up in here. Where was I? It is a self-closing tag and requires the following attributes. href, like the anchor element, the value of this attribute must be the address or path to the CSS file, and rel, this attribute describes the relationship between the HTML file and the CSS file. Because you are linking to a style sheet, the value should be set to style sheet. When linking an HTML file and a CSS file together, the link element will look like the following. Link hypertext ref equals https blah 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 rel style sheet. Note that in the example above, the path to the style sheet is a URL. This specifying the path to the style sheet using URL is one way of linking a style sheet. If the CSS file is stored in the same directory as your HTML file, then you can specify a relative path instead of a URL like so. Link href equals /style CSS rel style sheet. Using a relative path is a very common way of linking a style sheet. Let's link the style sheet style.css to the HTML file index.html. First, add a link element within the head section. Next, add the href attribute to the link. Sorry, wrong one. Href equals style.css. Take a look at the web page in the browser to the right. Do you notice any changes yet? I do not. Finally, add the rel attribute and set it to the correct value. Now we go. Keep an eye, it should appear different. Keep an eye on the first paragraph's font. It should appear different from the destination's descriptions when your style sheet is linked correctly. Cool. Review. Great work so far. Up next. Type. Remember that declarations are a fundamental part of CSS because they apply a style to a selected element. But how do you decide which elements will get the style? With a selector. A selector is used to target the specific HTML elements to be styled by the declaration. One selector you may already be familiar with is the type selector. Just like its name suggests, the type selector matches the type of the element in the HTML document. In the previous lesson, you changed the color of a paragraph element, P, to color green. This is an instance of using the type selector. The element type is P, which comes from the HTML P element. Some important notes on the type selector. The type selector does not include the angle brackets. Since element types are often referred to by their opening tag name, the type selector is sometimes referred to as the tag name or element selector. Open style.css. On line 5, add a rule set using the type selector to target all h1 elements. So h1, leave the declaration block empty for now. Cool. Inside the curly braces of the h1 selector, add the declaration below. Color maroon. Oops, what did I do wrong? Did you write color maroon inside the curly braces of the h1 selector? I thought I did. Inside the curly braces of the h1 selector, add the declaration below. Color maroon. Color maroon. Note that the content of the web page will update because we've already linked style. What did I do wrong, guys? h1 selector, color maroon. It faked me out. How dare you? Universal. You learned how the type selector selects all elements of a given type. Well, the universal selector selects all elements of any type. Targeting all of the elements on the page has a few specific use cases, such as resetting default browser styling or selecting all children of a parent element. Don't worry if you don't understand the use cases right now. We will get to them later on in our Learn CSS journey. The universal selector uses the asterisk character in the same place where you specified the type selector in a rule set like so. Asterisk, curly brace, font family, Verdana, and everything. In the code above, every text element on the page will have its font changed to Verdana. To see how the universal selector targets all elements on a page, copy the rule below and paste it on the first line of style.css. Then click Run. Since the universal selector targets all elements, every element on the page now has a red border. Not a visually pleasing look, but you can see how all of the elements have been modified. Class. CSS is not limited to selecting elements by their type. As you know, HTML elements can also have attributes. When working with HTML and CSS, a class attribute is one of the most common ways to select an element. For example, consider the following HTML. P, class equals brand, Seoul Shoe Company. The paragraph element in the example above has a class attribute within the opening tag of the P element. The class attribute is set to brand. To select this element using CSS, we can create a rule set with the class selector of .brand with the braces. To select an HTML element by its class using CSS, a period must be appended to the class's name. In the example above, the class is brand, so the CSS selector for it is .brand. On line 11 of index.html, line 11 of index.html, there is a, where am I? On line 11, there's an h1 element with the class title. Now open style.css. On line 13, use the class selector to create a rule set that selects that HTML element using the class title. Inside the curly braces of the title selector, add the declaration color teal. This code will change color of the h1 class to teal. We'll see in a later exercise why using the dot title overrides the h1 selector. Only issue is I'm not seeing teal. Oh, I saw it up there. This isn't, when I think of teal, I think of maybe a brighter color. Multiple classes. We can use CSS to select an HTML element's class attribute by name. And so far, we've selected elements using only one class name per element. If every HTML element had a single class, all the style information for each element would require a new class. Luckily, it's possible to add more than one class name to an HTML element's class attribute. For instance, perhaps there's a heading element that needs to be green and bold. You could write two CSS rule sets like so: .green, color green, .bold, font weight bold. Then you could include both of these classes on one HTML element like this: h1 class equals green, bold. We can add multiple classes to an HTML element's class attribute by separating them with a space. This enables us to mix and match CSS classes to create many unique styles without writing a custom class for every style combination needed. In index.html, on line 11, there is an h1 element with a class of title. Line 11, class title. Add a second class named uppercase to this element. Next, navigate to style.css and add a rule set using the .uppercase selector. Then add the declaration below inside of the curly braces. I'm just going to copy this. It's too many letters to type, and I will probably get some wrong. Cool. So now we see this is all uppercase. ID, oftentimes it's important to select a single element with CSS to give it its own unique style. If an HTML element needs to be styled uniquely, we can give it an ID using the ID attribute, so h1 ID large title. In contrast to class, which accepts multiple values and can be used broadly throughout an HTML document, an element's ID can only have a single value and only be used once per page. To select an element's ID with CSS, we prepend the ID name with a number sign right there. You could call this hashtag, you could call it pound. I am kind of in a pound phase right now, or I like calling it pound, but I used to call it hashtag. For instance, if we wanted to select the HTML element in the example above, it would look like this: pound large title, and the brackets, the braces, whatever you want to call them. The ID name is large title, therefore the CSS selector for it is pound large title. On line 11 of index.html, inside the h1 opening tag and after the class attribute, add an ID with the value article title. Navigate to style.css, add a rule set using the ID selector. Inside of its curly braces, write the declaration font family cursive. You'll see the title change to a cursive font, bringing some beauty and elegance to the page. If that's what you call it, okay, maybe not so much, but the font does change. Attribute. You may remember that some HTML elements use attributes to add extra detail or functionality to the element. Some familiar attributes may be href or and source, but there are many more, including class and ID. The attribute selector can be used to target HTML elements that already contain attributes. Elements of the same type can be targeted differently by their attribute or attribute value. This alleviates the need to add new code, like the class or ID attributes. Attributes can be selected similarly to types, classes, and IDs by placing them in brackets. The most basic syntax is an attribute surrounded by square brackets. In the above example, href would target all elements with an href attribute and set the color to magenta, and it can add more granular and it can get more granular from there by adding type and or attribute values. One way is by using type attribute asterisk equals value. In short, this code selects an element where the attribute contains any instance of the specified value. Let's take a look at an example. So here we see image source equals images seasons cold winter.jpg and image source images seasons warm summer.jpg. The HTML code above renders two image elements, each containing a source attribute with a value equaling a link to an image file. So image source equals winter, height 50 pixels, image source summer, height 100 pixels. Now take a look at the above CSS code. The attribute selector is used to target each image individually. The first rule set looks for an image element with an attribute of source that contains the string winter and sets the height to 50 pixels. The second rule set looks for an image element with an attribute of source that contains the string summer and sets the height to 100 pixels. Notice how no new HTML markup like a class or ID needed to be added. We were still able to modify the styles of each image independently. This is one advantage to using the attribute selector. To use the attribute selector to select the anchor element with an href attribute value containing Florence, add the following code to style.css. So a href asterisk equals Florence and color light green. Nice. Next, in style.css, use the attribute selector to select the anchor element that has an href attribute value containing Beijing. Add a declaration of color light blue to make the link appear light blue. So a href Beijing, and then curly braces, color, colon, what is it, light blue. Nice. Finally, use the attribute selector, change the anchor element that has an href attribute value containing Seoul to light pink. Seoul braces, color light pink. Sweet. Next, pseudo class. You may have observed how the appearance of certain elements can change or be in a different state after certain user interactions. For instance, when you click on an input element and a blue border is added showing that it is in focus. When you click on a blue anchor link to visit to another page, but when you return, the link's text is purple. When you're filling out a form and the submit button is grayed out and disabled, but when all of the fields have been filled out, the button has color showing that it's active. These are all examples of pseudo class selectors in action. In fact, colon focus, colon visited, colon disabled, and colon active are all pseudo classes. Factors such as user interaction, site navigation, and position in the document tree can all give elements a different state with pseudo class. A pseudo class can be attached to any selector. It is always written as a colon followed by a name. For example, p colon hover background color lime. In the above code, whenever the mouse hovers over a paragraph element, that paragraph will have a lime colored background. Add a rule set to the end of style.css that selects the anchor elements on the page, and leave the declaration block empty for now. Next, add a hover pseudo class to the a selector you just created. And lastly, set the text color to dark orange by adding the following CSS declaration inside the declaration block. Is it active? Where's the P's? Oh wait, A. Nice. Classes and IDs. CSS can select HTML elements by their type, class, and ID. CSS classes and IDs have different purposes, which can affect which one you use to style HTML elements. CSS classes are meant to be reused over many elements. By writing CSS classes, you can style elements in a variety of ways by mixing classes. For instance, imagine a page with two headlines. One headline needs to be bold and blue, and the other needs to be bold and green. Instead of writing separate CSS rules for each headline that represents each other's code, it's better to write a .bold CSS rule, a .green CSS rule, and a .blue CSS rule. Then you can give one headline the bold green classes and the other the bold blue classes. While classes are meant to be used many times, an ID is meant to style only one element. As you'll learn in the next exercise, IDs override the styles of types and classes. Since IDs override these styles, they should be used sparingly and only on elements that need to always appear the same. To demonstrate using classes on multiple elements, let's give a few elements the same style. In index.html, there are 4 h2 elements. Give each of them a class of heading background. Okay. Oh, sorry. Give each of them a class of heading background. So h2 right here, class. Give each of them a class of heading background. So in addition to destination, heading background. Where's the rest of them? Description, heading background. I'm just going to copy this. Heading background, h2. Now let's give a unique style to a single element using ID. On line 13 of index.html, there's an h6 element, line 13, h6, that displays the time the article on the page was published. Add an ID attribute to the h6 and give it the value of published time. Then in style.css, create a rule set targeting the new heading background class and give it a declaration, of background color aqua. So class is a dot. What is it? Heading background. Background. After you press run, notice how all of the h2 elements now have the same style. This heading background class can continue to be applied to any element you wish to bestow that amazing style onto. Finally, in style.css, create another rule set using the published time ID selector. ID selector is the pound published time color gray. Since IDs are single use, this element now has a unique ID that can't be used again in this document. And where is this applied? This is a published time. Oh, right here. Cool. Specificity. Specificity is the order by which the browser decides which CSS styles will be displayed. A best practice in CSS is to style elements while using the lowest degree of specificity so that if an element needs a new style, it is easy to override. IDs are the most specific selector in CSS, followed by classes, and finally type. For example, consider the following HTML and CSS. H1 class headline breaking news. H1 color red, dot headline color fire brick. In the example code above, the color of the heading would be set to fire brick as the class selector is more specific than the type selector. If an ID attribute and selector were added to the code above, the styles within the ID selector's body would override all the other styles for the heading. Over time, as files grow with code, many elements may have IDs, which can make CSS difficult to edit since a new, more specific style must be created to change the style of an element. To make styles easy to edit, it's best to style with a type selector, if possible. If not, add a class selector. If that is not specific enough, then consider using an ID selector. To compare type, class, and ID specificity, let's add a class and ID to an existing element. On line 12 of index.html, there is an h5 element with the author's name. Give the element a class of author class and an ID of author ID. So h5 class equals author class ID equals author ID. The element now has 3 ways of selecting it by type, class, and ID. Add the 3 following rule sets to the bottom of style.css utilizing each of the selectors. And now notice that this one, cornflower blue takes precedence. Each of these rules selects the same element in a different way. Which styling will win the specificity war? Click on to find out. Because ID is the most specific selector, the element will change to cornflower blue. You may have noticed the other H5 elements change to yellow. This is because the most specific and only selector they have is their type. Chaining. When writing CSS rules, it's possible to require an HTML element to have 2 or more CSS selectors at the same time. This is done by combining multiple selectors, which we refer to as chaining. For instance, if there was a special class for H1 elements, the CSS would look like below, h1.special. The code above would select only the H1 elements with a class of special. Deep breath. If a P element also had a class of special, the rule in the example would not style the paragraph. Let's use chaining to select only the H2 elements with destinations and add a style to them. In style.css, write a CSS selector for H2 elements with a class of .destination. Inside the selector's curly braces, add font family to Homa. This will change the font of the H2 elements, blah, 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 blah. Descent combinator. In addition to chaining selectors to select elements, CSS also supports selecting elements that are nested within other HTML elements, also known as descendants. For instance, consider the following HTML unordered list. Sorry, let me just remembering to set a timer for the time of my meeting, or at least a certain window before it. Okay. Now, where was I? Descent combinator. In addition to chaining selectors to select elements, CSS also supports selecting elements that are nested within other HTML elements, also known as descendants. For instance, consider the following HTML unordered list, class, main list, list item, list item, list item. The selected list item elements are descendants of the unordered list element and can be selected with the descent combinator like so. Class selector for main list and then list item. In the example above, main list selects the element within the main list class, the unordered list element. The descendant list items are selected by adding list item to the selector, separated by a space. This results in the main list item as the final selector. Selecting elements in this way can make our selectors even more specific by making sure that they appear in the context we expect. In index.html, each destination has a paragraph with a description class below it. Nested within each description paragraph is an H5 element with the top 5 attractants. So let's see, H5. Sorry, what are we looking at? Here we go. Top 5 attractions, unordered list, museums, bikes, tours. So this is within each description, H5 element, top attractions. They're a little hard to read since they turned yellow. It's true. Let's fix that. Navigate to style.css. Add a rule set that uses the descendant combinator to target only the H5 elements, only the H5 descendants of elements within the class dot description. H5. Inside the curly braces of the selector, add the declaration of color blue violet. Chaining and specificity. In the last exercise, instead of selecting all H5 elements, you selected only the H5 elements nested inside the dot description elements. This CSS selector was more specific than writing only H5. Adding more than one tag, class, or ID to a CSS selector increases the specificity of the CSS selector. For instance, consider the following CSS: p color blue, .main p color red. Both of these CSS rules define what a p element should look like. Since .main p has a class and a p type as its selector, only the p elements inside the .main element will appear red. This occurs despite there being another more general rule that states p elements should be blue. To show how specificity increases with additional selectors, let's create another rule set with the descendant combinator and compare it to a rule set without. In style.css, write a rule set using the descendant combinator to select the H4 elements nested in the list item elements inside of the curly braces. Write color gold. So list item H4 color gold. Nice. Now create a rule set targeting elements with just the H4 type and add a declaration of color Dodger blue. So we'll set H4, so targeting elements with just the H4 type. Sorry, what am I doing? and yet they are still gold. Multiple selectors. In order to make CSS more concise, it's possible to add CSS styles to multiple CSS selectors all at once. This prevents writing repetitive code. For instance, the following code is repetitive style attributes: H1 font family Georgia and .menu font family Georgia. Instead of writing font family Georgia twice for two selectors, we can separate the selectors by a comma to apply the same style to both, like this: H1 comma .menu font family Georgia. By separating the CSS selectors with a comma, both the H1 elements and the elements with the menu class will receive the font family Georgia styling. In style.css, write selectors for the H5 and list item elements, so they will both be styled with the same CSS rule. Apply this style declaration. So H1 and list item, and we're going to use the font family mono space. What'd I do wrong? Did you write a selector for H5 and list items? I did. Oh no, I did not. No, I did. Awesome. And I like that. It's a nice looking font. Review. No. Skip this. What are we doing next? Introduction to visual rules. I think once again it's time for a coffee break. Let's check the audio. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Cool. Bring this right here. Nice. Alright. So, introduction to visual rules. The purpose of CSS is to add style to a web page. And each element sorry. That was abrasive. I'm sorry. And each element on the page can have many styled properties. Some of the basic properties relate to the size, style, and color of the element. In this lesson, you learn some fundamental CSS visual rules that you can use to start styling web page elements. Explore the code to the right. Think about how it relates to the web page on the right side of the browser. So we see all of the basic stuff, right? Paragraphs, a div down there, div. This is not semantic HTML, clearly. And oh crap. I accidentally, can I walk that back? Jesus. What is happening? I just hit Control Z or Command Z, and I don't even know what to do. This brought me significantly back. It's not what I was expecting. Okay, wait, it just changed the tab. I don't think there's a, I think I have to refresh the page if I want that style sheet back. Okay, now let's look at the styles. See a style for the whole body. The background color, a gradient background. So new browsers can use the gradient background. Old browsers can't. So setting 3 different backgrounds depending on the browser. No margins, no padding. H1. So we see what is it called again? I know there's class selectors, there's element selectors, there's ID selectors. So these elements, things on these classes. Cool. It's looking good too. So let's go to the next one. If you've ever used word processing software like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, chances are that you probably also used a feature that allows you to change the font you were typing in. Font refers to the technical term typeface or font family. To change the typeface of text on your web page, you can use the font family property. In the example above, the font family for all main heading elements has been set to Garamond. When setting typefaces on a web page, keep the following points in mind. The font specified must be installed on the user's computer or downloaded with the site. Web-safe fonts are a group of fonts supported across most browsers and operating systems. Unless you are using web-safe fonts, the font you choose may not appear the same between all browsers and operating systems. When the name of the typeface consists of more than one word, it's the best practice to enclose this typeface's name in quotes like so, Courier New. You'll take a deeper look into typography in a later lesson. For now, inside styles.css, set the font family of the main heading H1. In styles.css, main heading H1, set the font family to Garamond. To Georgia. So font family equals Georgia. Copy that right there. Next, add a style rule that sets the font family of the paragraph P to Helvetica. Font size. Changing the typeface isn't the only way to customize the text. Oftentimes, different sections of a web page are highlighted by modifying the font size. To change the size of text on your web page, you can use the font size property, P font size 18 pixels. In the example above, the font size of all paragraphs was set to 18 pixels. PX means pixels, which is one way to measure font size. In style.css, set the font size of paragraph P elements to 18 pixels. So there, font size. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong section. Jody. So font size 18 pixels. Font weight. In CSS, the font weight property controls how bold or thin text appears. In the example above, all paragraphs on the web page would appear bolded. The font weight property has another value, normal. Why does it exist? If we wanted all text on a web page to appear bolded, we could select all text elements and change their font weight to bold. If a certain section of text was required to appear normal, however, we could set the font weight of that particular element to normal, essentially shutting off bold for that element. In style.css, set the font weight of a paragraph P elements to bold. P font weight is bold. Oh. Nice. Text align. No matter how much styling is applied to text, typeface, size, weight, etc., the text always appears on the left side of the container in which it resides. To align text, we can use the text align property. The text align property will align text to the element that holds it, otherwise known as its parent. H1 text align right. H1 text align. The text align property can be set to one of the following commonly used: left, center, right, and justify, which spaces it out in order to align with the right and left side of the parent element. In style.css, set the text align property of the main heading H1 so that it appears in the center. Color and background. Before discussing the specifics of color, it's important to make 2 distinctions about color. Color can affect the following design aspects: foreground color, background color. Foreground color is the color that an element appears in. For example, when a heading is styled to appear green, the foreground color of the heading has been styled. Conversely, when a heading is styled so that its background appears yellow, the background color of the heading has been styled. In CSS, these two design aspects can be styled with the following two properties: color. This property styles and elements foreground color, and background color. This property styles and elements background color. In the example above, the text of the heading will appear in red and the background of the heading will appear in blue. Take a look at the caption on the image at the bottom of the page. In style.css, set the background color of the dot caption selector to white. And now it has a white background. Then in the same rule set the color of the text to black. Now you can read it. Opacity is the measure of how transparent an element is. It's measured from 0 to 1, with 1 representing 100% or fully visible and opaque, and 0 representing 0% or fully invisible. Opacity can be used to make elements fade into others for a nice overlay effect. To adjust the opacity of an element, the syntax looks like so. Dot overlay, opacity 0.5. In the example above, the dot overlay element would be 50% visible, letting whatever is positioned behind it show through. Let's give the caption on the image some transparency. In style.css, set dot caption to have 0.75 opacity. Style.css, set dot caption to have 0.5 opacity. Dot caption, opacity, 0.5. Now it's kind of see-through. Did I do something wrong? Oh, 0.75. Nice. Less see-through. Background image. CSS has the ability to change the background of an element. One option is to make the background of an element an image. This is done through the CSS property background image. Its syntax looks like this: background image, URL, and parentheses, and then the URL within single quotes. The background image property will set the element's background to display an image. The value provided to background image is a URL. The URL should be a URL to an image. The URL can be a file within your project, or it can be a link to an external site. To link to an image inside an existing project, you must provide a relative file path. If there was an image folder in the project with an image named mountains.jpg, the relative file path would look like below: background image URL, images/mountains.jpg. In style.css, change the background image of the element with the image class. So, where's .image? Yep. Oh, sorry. So change it. The image is stored in the following URL. Okay. Copy that. Replacements. And now see how it looks. Different image. Like, look at that film grain. Looks good. Important. Exclamation mark important can be applied to specific declarations instead of full rules. It will override any style, no matter how specific it is. As a result, it should almost never be used. Once exclamation important is used, it is very hard to override. The syntax of exclamation important in CSS looks like this: P color blue, exclamation important. Since exclamation important is used on the P selector's color attribute, all P elements will appear blue, even though there is a more specific .main P selector that sets the color attribute to red. One justification for using exclamation important is when working with multiple style sheets. For example, if we are using the Bootstrap CSS framework and want to override the styles for one specific HTML element, we can use the exclamation important property. Imagine style library.css is a style sheet that is full of good styles, but you don't like how it is turning the color of H1 yellow. In style.css, add an exclamation mark important rule to the color style of the inside the H1 rule set to change the color back to FFF white. Sorry, that kind of went over my head. So imagine style library CSS is a style sheet. So it is great. That is full of good styles, but you don't like how it is turning the color of H1 yellow. No like. In style.css, add an important rule to the color style of inside the H1 rule set. Okay, I think that's a typo. Maybe that's why it confused me. So important. Gotta stop doing that. Nice. Cool. So we can set font size, the family, the weight, its alignment, the color, background color, opacity, background image, and an important overrider. Skip this for now. Introduction to the box model. How am I doing on time? I'm doing good. Browsers load HTML elements with default position values. This often leads to an unexpected and unwanted user experience while limiting the views you can create. In this lesson, you will learn about the box model, an important concept to understand how elements are positioned and displayed on a website. If you have used HTML and CSS, you have unknowingly seen aspects of the box model. For example, if you've set the background color of an element, you may have noticed that the color was applied not only to the area directly behind the element, but also to the area to the right of the element. Also, if you have aligned text, you know it is aligned relative to something. What is that something? All elements on a web page are interpreted by the browser as living inside of a box. This is what is meant by the box model. For example, when you change the background color of an element, you change the background color of its entire box. In this lesson, you'll learn about the following aspects of the box model: the dimensions of an element's box, the borders of an element's box, the paddings of an element's box, the margins of an element's box. Let's begin. Instructions. Take some time to explore the code to the right. See if you can figure out how these following CSS properties impact how an element is displayed: width, height, padding. So for example, if we're looking at H2, border, which one's H2? So H2 is league embraces responsible something or other. Where's the league at? The league. Okay, maybe I've messed up by doing H2. H1. Okay, that's this. Where's H2 in here? Sorry, H1. So color is white, font size, text align center. Interesting that we don't see a border around it, but I'm gonna assume the border is part of the parent element. So it's either ID banner or class content. If we look up this ID banner, we see that it has this background image of all this and has a specific height, specific width. The width is 100% of the page. The height is 700 pixels tall. And if we look at banner.content, we see this white border, 3 pixels wide. White position is relative to the banner. And so that means it's going to be 50 pixels from the top. It's going to have a width of 400 pixels and a margin of 0. Okay. Got a good understanding now. The box model. The box model comprises the set of properties that define parts of an element that take up space on a web page. The model includes the content area's size, width, and height, and the element's padding, border, and margin. The properties include width and height, the width and height of the content area, padding, the amount of space between the content area and the border, border, the thickness and style of the border surrounding the content area and padding, margin, the amount of space between the border and the outside edge of the element. So if this is our content and we increase the padding, we're really making our content kind of fatter, like taking up more space. If we create a border, we're creating a thick line around it, and margin, we're pushing everything outside of us. We're getting personal space, right? Okay, so instructions. Take a look at the image to the right. Okay. Height and width. An element's content has 2 dimensions, a height and a width. By default, the dimensions of an HTML box are set to hold the raw contents of the box. The CSS height and width properties can be used to modify these default dimensions. So here we see P with a height of 80 pixels and a width of 240 pixels. In this example, the height and width of paragraph elements are set to 80 pixels and 240 pixels respectively. The PX in the code above stands for pixels. Pixels allow you to set the exact size of an element's box, width and height. When the width and height of an element are set in pixels, it will be the same size on all devices. An element that fills a laptop screen will overflow a mobile screen. Now, what we need to do is add a height of 700 pixels to pound banner, which is everything with an ID of banner, which I guess IDs are distinct. So the banner at a height of 700 pixels. Cool. Command set a pull quote with the class pull quote. Where's that at? Right down here. Pull quote width of 350. Uh-oh. What'd I do wrong? You set dot pull quote width to 350. Oh, PX. Set the banner dot content banner.content h1 width to 400 pixels. Next up, borders. A border is a line that surrounds an element, like a frame around a painting. Borders can be set with a specific width, style, and color. Width, the thickness of the border. A border's thickness can be set in pixels or with one of the following keywords: thin, medium, or thick. Style, the design of the border. Web browsers can render any of 10 different styles. Some of these styles include none, dotted, and solid. Color, the color of the border. Web browsers can render colors using a few different formats, including 140 built-in color keywords. So here we see P, border is 3 pixels, solid, coral. In the example above, the border has a width of 3 pixels, a style of solid, and a color of coral. All three properties are set in one line of code. The default border is medium, none, color, where color is the current color of the element. If width, style, or color are not set in the CSS file, the web browser assigns the default value for that property. So here we can do just border of solid coral, but we're not going to see anything because we didn't set the width. In this example, the border style is set to solid and the color is set to coral. The width is not set, so it defaults to medium. I misspoke. I'm sorry about that. Add a dotted red border with 1 pixel thickness to all H2 headings. So H2 right here, border with 1 pixel thickness to all H2 headings. Add a dotted, oh I forgot, I'm ignoring things. Dotted red. Add a solid white border with a 3 pixel width to the banner content H1 rule. So border solid, so hold on, 3 pixels, solid white. Nice. Border radius. Ever since we revealed the borders of boxes, you may have noticed that the borders highlight the true shape of an element's box, square. Thanks to CSS, a border doesn't have to be square. You can modify the corners of an element's border box with the border radius property. The code in the example above will set all 4 corners of the border to a radius of 5 pixels, i.e. the same curvature that a circle with a radius of 5 pixels would have. You can create a border that is a perfect circle by first creating an element with the same width and height, and then setting the radius equal to half the width of the box, which is 50%. The code in the example above creates a div that is a perfect circle with border radius 50%. In style.css, set the border radius of ID banner class content element H1 to 15 pixels. Set the border radius 15 pixels. Additionally, try experimenting with border radius values. What happens if we make this 50% even though it's not a perfect square? We'll find out soon. Ugh, ugly. Let's go back to 15%. And let's address padding. So, the space between the contents of a box and the borders of a box is known as padding. Padding is like the space between a picture and the frame surrounding it. In CSS, you can modify this space with the padding property. P.content header and borders that padding is 10 pixels. In the code in this example puts 10 pixels of space between the content of the paragraph, the text, and the borders on all 4 sides. The padding property is often used to expand the background color and make the content look less cramped. If you want to be more specific about the amount of padding on each side of a box's content, you can use the following properties: padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. Each property affects the padding on only one side of the box's content, giving you more flexibility and customization. So here we see padding bottom, 10 pixels. In the example above, only the bottom side of the paragraph's content will have a padding of 10 pixels. In a single line, set the dot navigation list item elements to have 20 pixels of padding. So padding 20 pixels. Click run and observe the changes. I forget, so I guess the padding got better or more spaced out. Look at the red boxes at the bottom of the web page right here. Set the share.share a. Again, dot means it is a class selector. Look at the red boxes at the bottom of the web page. Set the class share a elements to have 14 pixels of padding in style.css and run your code. Padding 14 pixels. Look at that. Nice. Set the top and bottom padding of H2 elements to 20 pixels. Where's the H2 elements? Padding top 20 pixels. I know there's a simpler way to do this, but I think they're going to tell us later. Padding, top and bottom padding of H2 elements at 20 pixels, and set the left and right padding of H2 elements at 30. So top and bottom, 20 pixels each, and padding left, 30 pixels, padding right, 30 pixels. Cool. Next, padding shorthand. Another implementation of the padding property lets you specify exactly how much padding there should be on each side of the content in a single declaration. A declaration that uses multiple properties as values is known as a shorthand property. Padding shorthand lets you specify all of the padding properties as values on a single line. Padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. You can specify these properties in a few different ways. 4 values, p.content header, padding 6 pixels, 11 pixels, 4 pixels, 9 pixels. In the example above, the 4 values, 6 pixels, 11 pixels, 4 pixels, 9 pixels, correspond to the amount of padding on each side in a clockwise rotation. In order, it specifies the padding top, the padding right, padding bottom, and the padding left. So actually clockwise. 3 values. If the left and right sides of the content value can be equal, the padding shorthand property allows for 3 values to be specified. The first value specifies the top, the second value specifies the sides, and the third value specifies the bottom. And then with 2 values, if the top and bottom sides can be equal, and the left and right sides can be equal, you can specify 2 values. The first value sets the padding top and padding bottom, and the second value sets the sides. Change the individual padding declarations on the H2 selector. We're at the H2 selector. So change the padding declarations to use padding shorthand with 2 values. Keep the padding for the top and bottom at 20. Okay, nice. So padding, top and bottom is 20 pixels, and sides are 30 pixels. Using 2 values for the padding property, set the padding of the P elements. Set the padding of the P element to 10 pixels on top and 20 pixels on the sides. Cool. Margin. So far you've learned about the following components of the box model: content, borders, and padding. The fourth and final component of the box model is margin. Margin refers to the space directly outside of the box. The margin property is used to specify the size of this space. Here we see margin as 20 pixels. The code in the example above will place 20 pixels of space on the outside of the paragraph's box on all 4 sides. This means that other HTML elements on the page cannot come within 20 pixels of the paragraph's border. If you want to be even more specific about the amount of margin on each side of a box, you can use the following properties: top, right, bottom, left. Each property affects the margin on only one side of the box. Got you. In the example above, only the right side of the paragraph's box will have a margin of 15 pixels. It's common to see margin values used for a specific side of an element. Set the top margin of P elements to 60 pixels. So let's go to P right here. Margin top 60 pixels. Look at the 3 red boxes at the bottom of the web page. These elements are anchor elements of class.share, so share A. Set these .share A elements to have a margin of 10 pixels. Margin 10 px. Margin shorthand. What if you don't want equal margins on all 4 sides of the box and don't have time to separate properties for each side? You're in luck. Margin can be written as a shorthand property as well. So same idea here. Using 2 values, set the H2 top and bottom margins to 30 pixels. So H2 so top and bottom is 30 pixels, and left and right is 20 pixels. Auto. The margin property also lets you center content. However, you must follow a few syntax requirements. Take a look at the following example. Here we see div.headline with 40 pixels, margin 0 auto. In the example above, margin 0 auto will center the divs in their containing elements. The 0 sets the top and bottom margins to 0 pixels. The auto value instructs the browser to adjust the left and right margins until the element is centered within its containing element. In order to center an element, a width must be set for that element. Otherwise, the width of the div will be automatically set to the full width of its containing element, like the body, for example. It's now possible to center an element that takes up the full width of the page, since the width of the page can change due to display and or browser window size. In the example above, the width of the div is set to 400 pixels, which is less than the width of most screens. This will cause the div to center within a containing element that is greater than 400 pixels wide. So again, in the example above, width of the div is set to 400 pixels, which is less than the width of most screens. This will cause the div to center within a containing element that is greater than 400 pixels wide. Got you. Set the width of the dot pull quote class element to 350 pixels. pixels to be specific. So pull quote class, pull quote width 350px. In one line, set the vertical top and bottom margins of the dot pull quote class to 0. So margin 0 and auto for the sides. Set the vertical margins of the main element. Where's that? Main margin. Vertical 0 and horizontal auto. Nice. Margin collapse. As you've seen, padding is space added inside an element's border, while margin is space added outside an element's border. One additional difference is that top and bottom margins, also called vertical margins, collapse, while top and bottom padding does not. Horizontal margins, left and right, like padding, are always displayed and added together. For example, if two divs with IDs div1 and div2 are next to each other, they will be as far apart as the sum of their adjacent margins. So if we have image 1 with a margin right of 20 pixels and an image 2 with a margin left of 20 pixels, in this example, the space between image 1 and image 2 borders is 40 pixels. The right margin of image 1, 20 pixels, and the left margin of image 2, 20 pixels, add to make a total margin of 40 pixels. Unlike horizontal margins, vertical margins do not add. Instead, the larger of the two vertical margins sets the distance between adjacent elements. So if we have image 1 with a margin bottom of 30 pixels, and image 2 with a margin top of 20 pixels, they're going to overlap, and margin bottom of 30 pixels will win out. In this example, the vertical margin between them is 30 pixels. Although the sum of the margins is 50 pixels, the margin collapses, so the spacing is only dependent on the image 1 bottom margin. It may be helpful to think of collapsing vertical margins as a short person trying to push a taller person. The taller person has longer arms and can easily push the short person, while the person with short arms cannot reach the person with long arms. It's kind of like that. Instructions. Study the graphic displayed to the right. Elements A and B have 20 pixels of horizontal margin. The sum of each element's margin. So elements A and B have 20 pixels of horizontal margin, which is the sum of each element's margin. Elements A and C have 30 pixels of margin, a vertical margin, the top margin of element C. Makes sense. Minimum and maximum height and width. Because a web page can be viewed through displays of differing screen size, the content on the web page can suffer from those changes in size. To avoid this problem, CSS offers two properties that can limit how narrow or how wide an element's box can be sized to. Min width. This property ensures a minimum width of an element's box. Max width. This property ensures a maximum width of an element's box. So here we have paragraph with a min width of 300 pixels and a max width of 600 pixels. In the example above, the width of all paragraphs will not shrink below 300 pixels, nor will the width exceed 600 pixels. Content like text can become difficult to read when a browser window is narrowed or expanded. These two properties ensure that content is legible by limiting the minimum and maximum widths of an element. You can also limit the minimum and maximum height of an element with min height and max height. In the example above, the height of all paragraphs will not shrink. Got you. Makes sense. In style, CSS set the minimum width of the P element to 200 pixels. So where's P at? Min width. It's now 200 pixels by my command. After you've done this successfully, resize the browser and notice how the paragraphs box will no longer shrink below 200 pixels. So if we bring it out, it's going to expand. But if we do this, it doesn't go under 200 pixels. So next, set the maximum width of the P element to 800 pixels. Max width 800 pixels. And now what we see is will not go beyond a certain length or a certain width. In style.css, set the minimum height of the P element to 200 pixels. Okay. Got you. Got you, dog. I'll do that. Get right on that, man. Yep, I don't feel like resizing. Let's just get through this. Where's P? Max height. Cool. So overflow. All of the components of the box model comprise an element size. For example, an image that has the following dimensions is 364 pixels wide and 244 pixels tall. 300 pixels wide, 200 pixels tall, 10 pixels padding on left and right, 10 pixels padding on top and bottom, a 2 pixel border on left and right, 2 2 pixel border on top and bottom, and 20 pixels of margin on the left and right, 10 pixels margin on top and bottom. The total dimensions are calculated by adding them all together. Sometimes these result in an element larger than the parent's containing area. How can we ensure that we can view all of an element that is larger than its parent's containing area? The overflow property controls what happens to content that spills or overflows outside its box. The most commonly used values are hidden. When set to this value, any content that overflows will be hidden from view. Scroll. When set to this value, a scroll bar will be added to the element's box so that the rest of the content can be viewed by scrolling and visible. When set to this value, the overflow content will be displayed outside of the containing element. Note that this is the default value. So here we see P overflow scroll. In the example above, if any of the paragraph content overflows, perhaps the user resizes their browser, a scroll bar will appear so that users can view the rest of the content. The overflow property is set on a parent element to instruct a web browser on how to render child elements. For example, if a div's overflow property is set to scroll, all children of this div will display overflowing content with a scroll bar. For a more in-depth look at overflow, including additional properties like overflow X and overflow Y that separate out the horizontal and vertical values, head over to the MDN documentation. In order to see the impact of overflow scroll, first change the height of the main element to 1000 pixels. So height 1000 px. Okay, look at that, not looking great. Set the overflow of the main element to scroll. So now we have a little scroll bar, looking good again. Resetting defaults. All major web browsers have a default style sheet they use in the absence of an external style sheet. These default style sheets are known as user agent style sheets. In this case, the term user agent is a technical term for the browser. User agent style sheets often have default CSS rules that set default values for padding and margin. This affects how the browser displays HTML elements, which can make it difficult for a developer to design or style a web page. Many developers choose to reset these default values so that they can truly work with a clean slate. Here we see all margin 0, padding 0. The code in the example above resets the default margin and padding values of all HTML elements. It is often the first CSS rule in an external style sheet. Note that both properties are set to 0. When these properties are set to 0, they do not require a unit of measurement. In style.css, reset the default margin and padding values for the body. What happens to the web page in the browser? Let's find out. So come up here, asterisk there, margin 0, padding 0. Let's see what happens. Now it's touching. Visibility. Elements can be elements can be hidden from view with the visibility property. The visibility property can be set to one of the following values: hidden, visible, collapse. So, unordered list with list items, class is future there, and dot future, visibility is hidden. In the example above, the list item with the class of future will be hidden from view in the browser. Keep in mind, however, that users can still view the contents of the list item, e.g. donate, by viewing the source code in their browser. Furthermore, the web page will only hide the contents of the element. It will still leave an empty space where the element is intended to display. Note, what's the difference between display none and visibility hidden? An element with display none will be completely removed from the web page. An element with visibility hidden, however, will not be visible on the web page, but the space reserved for it will. Take a look at the list items in index.html. Notice that the list item donate, which is right here, notice that the list item donate has a class of donate. In style.css, add a class selector rule set for donate. Set the visibility to hidden. Now donate is gone wherever it is. I think it's up there. Review. Okay, great. Making progress, getting through it. So, why change the box model? The last lesson focused on the most important aspects of the box model: box dimensions, borders, padding, and margin. The box model, however, has an awkward limitation regarding box dimensions. This limitation is best illustrated with an example. So if we have header 1 hello world, and we have h1 border 1 pixel solid black, height 200 pixels, width 300 pixels, padding 10 pixels. In the example above, a heading elements box has solid black 1 pixel thick borders. The height of that box is 200 pixels, while the width, I know. Unfortunately, under the current box model, the border thickness and the padding will affect the dimensions of the box. So the 10 pixels of padding increases the height of the box to 220 pixels and the width to 320 pixels. Next, the 1 pixel thick border increases the height to 222 pixels and the width to 322 pixels. Under this box model, the border thickness and padding are added to the overall dimensions of the box. This makes it difficult to accurately size the box. Over time, this can also make all of the web page's content difficult to position and manage. In this brief lesson, you'll learn how to use a different technique that avoids this problem altogether. We'll be using the app provided to demonstrate how to work with the box model. Click next to continue. So, this is cool. Box model content box. Many properties in CSS have a default value and don't have to be explicitly set in the style sheet. For example, the default font weight of text is normal, but this property value pair is not typically specified in the style sheet. The same can be said about the box model that browsers assume. In CSS, the box sizing property controls the type of box model the browser should use when interpreting a web page. The default value of this property is content box. This is the same box model that is affected by border thickness and padding. Study the diagram on the right. It illustrates the default box model used by the browser, content box. When you're done, continue to the next exercise. So here we have content width, left padding 20 pixels, right padding 20 pixels, and left border 1 pixel, actual rendered width is 200 pixels. I'm going to reread this because kind of went over my head, losing focus. Okay, box model content box. Many properties in CSS have a default value and don't have to be explicitly set in the style sheet. For example, the default font weight of text is normal, but this property value pair is not typically specified in the style sheet. The same can be said about the box model that browsers assume. In CSS, the box sizing property controls the type of box model the browser should use when interpreting a web page. The default value of this property is content box. This is the same box model that is affected by border thickness and padding. Got you. Box model border box. Fortunately, we can reset the entire box model and specify a new one, border box. So here we see asterisk box sizing border box. The code in the example above resets the box model to border box for all HTML elements. This new box model avoids the dimensional issues that exist in the former box model you learned about. In this box model, the height and width of the box will remain fixed. The border thickness and padding will be included inside of the box, which means the overall dimensions of the box do not change. So the content width itself is auto set, and when we do a left padding of 20 pixels and a right padding of 20 pixels and add the borders, because the width property has been set with 200 pixels, these things are really what we have manual control over, whereas the width of the actual content itself is automatically set, determined on how we set everything else. In the example above, the height of the box would remain at 150 pixels and the width would remain at 200 pixels. The border thickness and padding would remain entirely inside the box. Study the diagram to the right. It illustrates the border box model from the code above. Pay attention to how the total width 200 pixels and the padding affect the content width of the element. The width property is the same as the actual rendered width of the element. The content area is automatically sized based on the remaining width after border and padding has been subtracted. The new box model. Now that you know about the new box model, it's actually implemented in the browser. So we do asterisk box sizing border box. So in styles, right at the top, paste that in there. In style.css, change the box model for all elements on the web page to the new box model. You probably didn't see a difference on the web page to the right. That's okay. The new box model simply makes sure the dimensions of elements remain the same regardless of border, width, and padding. Cool. Review, changing the box model. In this lesson, you learned an important limitation of the default box model. Box dimensions are affected by border thickness and padding. Let's review what you learned. No, thank you. I'd like to continue on. So we're going to skip that for now. We're going to go to the next section, the box model and DevTools. View and edit an HTML elements box sizing using Chrome. DevTools. Introduction. All HTML elements are boxes made up of 4 components: a content container, padding, border, and margin. In our box model lesson, we introduced these 4 properties and use them to position elements on a website. If you have not taken this lesson, we recommend you do so now before continuing. In this article, we will introduce how Google Chrome's DevTools can be used to view the box around each element on a web page. View box model dimensions with DevTools. You can use Google Chrome's DevTools to view the box around every element on a web page. There are a few different ways to open DevTools depending on your platform. On a Mac, Command Option I. View developer. View. I see stuff right here. View developer DevTools. Oh, it's just say they're all the same thing. Okay. Use whichever method works best for you. When you have the DevTools open, navigate to the Elements tab there. In this tab, you can view all of the elements on the current page. From this view, you can select the element of interest, which will open a new column on the right side of DevTools. So in this view, you can view all the elements on the current page. From this view, you can select the element of interest. Which will open a new column on the right side of DevTools. Select the tab labeled Computed on the top of the rightmost column. Computed. The selected elements box should appear at the top of the pane. Hovering over each property of the box will cause the property to be highlighted in the web page. If you know the element you want to inspect, go through all the steps listed above is unnecessary. Instead, you can right-click the element you want to observe and select the Inspect button. So for example, let's look at this image and select the Inspect button. Now here, if I hover over the actual content, we see that there's no padding or margin applied. It's just the content itself. If you know, or at least that's what I'm assuming, if you know the element you want to inspect, blah, 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 instead you can right-click, you display DevTools on the right side browser to ensure the element's weights. If you'd like some more info or a refresher on how to use this, look at that video. Exercise 1, view a website's box model dimensions. Complete the following steps within the current web browser view. In a new tab, navigate to the Wikipedia page. We'll do this. I'll place it side by side, X this out, right-click or Control and click simultaneously the contents navigation box displayed in the image below. Okay, right-click or Control and click simultaneously. Inspect. Select the Computer tab at the top of the rightmost column. Hover over the different properties of the logo's box. I'll see here. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Modify box dimensions. Now that you know how to view the box of an element, we'll modify the box's values with DevTools. To modify the values of the box, double-click the property value. Assign it a new number. Whoa. Assign a new number. You can adjust the value incrementally, blah, blah, blah. And the image above the border on each side is set to 1 and the padding is set to 7. These values can be changed by double-clicking the values in the box and assigning them new numbers, or using the up or down arrow keys on your keyboard. If you inspect an element and find that the border is set to hyphen, adding a numerical value will not make a border appear. The border color, style, and width must be set in the CSS document in order to set the border. Exercise 2, modify website's box model dimensions. Pick up where you left off in exercise 1. Double-click the top padding of the element. Use the up and down arrows to adjust the element's padding. And I'm gonna just keep going. Keep on pushing. What's my time looking like? Not poor. We'd love to hear about your experience. I had more fun in the HTML. I'm gonna now exit the survey. Did I make it through the whole thing? It looks like it. 6 hours is what it said, but oh snap. I was too cocky. First of all, let me get this out of here. What am I looking at now? Yeah, no, I didn't make it through the whole thing. Display and positioning, flow of HTML. A browser will render the elements of an HTML document that has no CSS from left to right, top to bottom, in the same order as they exist in the document. This is called the flow of elements in HTML. In addition to the properties that it provides to style HTML elements, CSS includes properties that change how a browser positions elements. These properties specify where an element is located on a page. If the element can share lines with other elements and other related attributes. Sorry, I misread that. These properties specify where an element is located on a page, if the element can share lines with other elements and other related attributes. In this lesson, you will learn 5 properties for adjusting the position of HTML elements in the browser: position, display, z-index, float, and clear. Each of these properties will allow us to position and view elements on a web page. They can be used in conjunction with any other styling properties you may know. So, for position, take a look at the block level elements in the image below. So we see my awesome website, h1 800 by 36, div 300 by 150, hello world 800 by 18, and so this div is 650 by 120. Block level elements, like these boxes, create a block the full width of their parent elements, and they prevent other elements from appearing in the same horizontal space. Notice the block level elements in the image above take up their own line of space and therefore don't overlap each other. In the browser to the right, you can see block level elements also consistently appear on the left side of the browser. This is the default position for block level elements. The default position of an element can be changed by setting its position property. The position property can take one of 5 values: static, the default value, it does not need to be specified; relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. In the next few exercises, you'll learn about the values in the list above. For now, it's important to understand that if you favor the default position of an HTML element, you don't need to set its position property. In style.css, add a declaration to the dot question rule set right here. It sets its position static. Notice that setting position to static does nothing. That's because static simply refers to the default behavior. Position relative. One way to modify the default position of an element is by setting its position property to relative. This value allows you to position an element relative to its default static position on the web page. Although the code in the example above instructs the browser to expect a relative positioning of the .green box element, it does not specify where the .green box element should be positioned on the page. This is done by accompanying the position declaration with one or more of the following offset properties that will move the element away from its default static position: top, bottom, left, and right, and they all move an element from that. So top moves the element down from the top, bottom moves it up from the bottom, left moves it away from the left, and right moves it away from the right. You can specify values in pixels, ems, or percentages, among others, to dial in exactly how far you need the element to move. It's also important to note that offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. So here we could see if you have position relative and do top 50 pixels and left 120, you're moving it away from the top by 50 pixels, and you're moving it away from the left by 120 pixels, like so. In the example above, the element of green box class will be moved down 50 pixels and to the right 120 pixels from its default static position. The image below displays the new position of the box. Okay, great. Offsetting the relative element will not affect the positioning of other elements. In style.css, inside the dot question rule set, right here, change the position property to be relative. Next, offset question 40 pixels from the top. Looky here. I think that's what changed. I don't really know. Position absolute. Another way of modifying the position of an element is by setting its position to absolute. When an element's position is set to absolute, all other elements on the page will ignore the element and act like it is not present on the page. The element will be positioned relative to its closest positioned parent element, while offset properties can be used to determine the final position from there. Take a look at the image below. Right there, we've moved it down 300 and moved it to the right by none. Or maybe that's, I'm not 100% sure. So this website is in progress. Come back later text is displaced from its static position at the top left corner of its parent container. It has offset property declarations of top 300. So move down 300 and write 0, positioning it 300 pixels down and 0 pixels from the right side of the page. In style.css, set the position inside of the header rule set to absolute. Oops. Which one's the header again? Okay, notice how it's now removed from the normal flow of the document and covering the welcome section. Maybe I did something wrong. Yeah, I definitely did something wrong. Position absolute. Okay, now that makes sense. When you change the position to absolute, you may have noticed that the header shrunk horizontally. We'll learn why in a later exercise. For now, set the width property of the header to 100%. Man, I need to wake up. Position fixed. When an element's position is set to absolute, as in the last exercise, the element will scroll with the rest of the document when a user scrolls. So, we're not seeing it there. We can fix an element to a specific position on the page regardless of user scrolling by setting its position to fixed and accompanying it with the familiar offset properties top, bottom, left, and right. So here we see dot title, position fixed, top 0, left 0. In the example above, the dot title element will remain fixed to its position no matter where the user scrolls on the page. Like in the image below, no matter the scroll, we still see my awesome website at the top. This technique is often used for navigation bars on a web page. In style.css, change the position property inside of the header rule to fixed. So here we see position, make that fixed. Now if we scroll, it stays there. Notice that part of the welcome section is now covered up by the header. That's because when we changed the position of the header to fix, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. Set the position of the .welcome element to relative. So .welcome position is relative. Now, Now offset the welcome section by 200 pixels from the top. Everything might not be displaying correctly just yet. We'll fix it in a later exercise, but at least it's not covering up that topmost element. Now, position sticky. Since static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal flow of the document, when a user scrolls the page or parent element, these elements will scroll too. And since fixed and absolute positioned elements are removed from the document flow, when a user scrolls, these elements will stay at their specified offset position. The sticky value is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as the user scrolls, but sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. This is done by using the sticky value along with the familiar offset properties, as well as one new one. So here we see dot box bottom, background color dark green, position sticky, and top 240 pixels. In the example above, the dot box bottom div will remain in its relative position and scroll as usual. When it reaches 240 pixels from the top, it will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of its parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow of the document. Inside style.css, change the position of the elements with the class question to sticky. So dot question, position, we're going to sticky. Whoa. Z-index. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes and therefore their content can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. So here we see dot blue box. That's a class blue box and the color is blue, and then the class green box has a background color green, a position of relative, top a negative 170 and a left 170. In the example above, the green box element overlaps on top of the blue box element. The z-index property controls how far back or how far forward an element should appear on the web page when elements overlap. This can be thought of as the depth of elements, with deeper elements appearing behind shallower elements. The z-index property accepts integer values depending on their values. The integers instruct the browser on the order in which elements should be layered on the web page. So you could think about it as if this is an x-axis and this is a y-axis. Z-index is the z-axis. How close is it to you, or how far away is it to you relative to how images overlap? In the example above, we set the blue box class position to relative and the z-index to 1. We changed position to relative because the z-index property does not work on static elements. The z-index of 1 moves the dot blue box element forward because the z-index value has not been explicitly specified for the green box element, which means it has a default z-index value of 0. Take a look at the example image below. This blue box, which looks purple to me, but we'll call it blue, has a position relative and a z-index of 1, whereas the green box has a position relative and a top. So it should be covering up the blue box, but because it has no z-index set, the blue box takes precedence in front of it. In style.css, set the z-index of the header to 10. Alright, so z-index 10. Notice how the header is no longer covered by other elements when you scroll. Cool. Inline display. Every HTML element has a default display value that dictates if it can share horizontal space with other elements. Some elements fill the entire browser from left to right regardless of the size of their content. Other elements only take up as much horizontal space as their content requires and can be directly next to other elements. In this lesson, we'll cover 3 values for the display property: inline, block, and inline block. The default display for some elements such as M, strong, and A is called inline. Inline elements have a box that wraps tightly around their content, only taking up the amount of space necessary to display their content and not requiring a new line after each element. The height and width of these elements cannot be specified in the CSS document. For example, the text of an anchor tag A will, by default, be displayed on the same line as the surrounding text, and it will only be as wide as necessary to contain its content. Inline elements cannot be altered in size with the height or width CSS properties. In the example above, this M element is inline because it displays its content on the same line as the content surrounding it, including the anchor tag. This example will display this. In the CSS display property provides the ability to make any element an inline element. This includes elements that are not inline by default, such as paragraphs, divs, and headings, by adding display inline. The CSS in the example above will change the display of all h1 elements to inline. The browser will render h1 elements on the same line as other inline elements immediately before or after them, if there are any. In index.html, add opening and closing strong tags around the word welcome. So index, where's the word welcome? Right there. So around the word welcome, notice that the element does not move. That's because strong elements are inline, so they can share elements with other elements. Makes sense. Display block. Some elements are not displayed in the same line as the content around them. These are called block level elements. These elements fill the entire width of the page by default, but their width property can also be set. Unless otherwise specified, they are the height necessary to accommodate their content. Elements that are block level by default include all levels of heading elements, h1 through h6, paragraphs, divs, and footers. If a complete list of block element, or blah blah blah. In the example above, all strong elements will be displayed on their own line, with no content directly on either side of them, even though their contents may not fill the width of most computer screens. In index.html, add a footer element at the bottom of the document, right above the closing body tag. So right above this, we add a footer. Nothing changed. That's because the footer element is empty. Let's make it not empty. Add an h3 that says thanks for taking our survey. You can see it there. To improve the appearance of the web page, set the height of the footer to 100 pixels in style.css height. Now it looks pretty similarly bad, but whatever. Display inline block. The third value for the display property is inline block. Inline block Display combines features of both inline and block elements. Inline block elements can appear next to each other, and we can specify their dimensions using the width and height properties. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. For example, the divs below will be displayed on the same line with the specified dimensions. I'm rectangle, so am I, me 3. Let's take a look at the code. So we have div class rectangle, I'm a rectangle, div class rectangle, so am I, and div class rectangle, me 3. And this class rectangle has a display of inline block with a width of 200 pixels and a height of 300 pixels. There are 3 rectangular divs that each contain a paragraph of text. The class rectangle divs will all appear inline, provided there's enough space from left to right, with a width of 200 pixels and a height of 300 pixels, even though the text inside of them may not require 200 pixels by 300 pixels of space. Instructions. Let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu at the top of the page. Set the display property of list item elements to inline block. So we have list items, display. Now they're all in an inline block. Set the width of the list item elements to 80 pixels. Amazing. Now we can reduce the top offset of the welcome section. Set it to 50 pixels. So welcome section is, how do we have that? Welcome, top, we'll make this 50 pixels. Boom. Set the display property of answer class elements to inline block. So dot answer display inline block. Whoa. Cool. Float. So far, you've learned how to specify the exact position of an element using offset properties. If you're simply interested in moving an element as far left or as far right as possible in the container, you can use float property. The float property is commonly used for wrapping text around an image. Note, however, that moving elements left or right for layout purposes is better suited for tools like CSS Grid and Flexbox, which you'll learn about later on. The float property is often set using one of the values below. Left moves or floats elements as far left as possible. Right moves elements as far right as possible. So in green section class, we see width 50 and width 50% and a height of 150 pixels. And in the orange section, we see background color is orange, width 50%, float right. In the example above, we float the .orange section element to the right. This works for static and relative positioned elements. See the result of the code below. So now this is floated over to the right. Floated elements must have a width specified, as in the example above, otherwise the element will assume the full width of its containing element, and changing the float value will not yield any visible results. Add a declaration to the .answer rule set that sets the float property to the left. So we're looking for the answer class, and we're doing a declaration which displays it. My fault. Let's display float, correct? Or no, just float right. So float property to the left. Whoa, didn't mean to do that. Cool. And we did it. Clear. The float property can also be used to float multiple elements at once. However, when multiple floated elements have different heights, it can affect their layout on the page. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not allow other elements to properly move to the left or right. The clear property specifies how elements should behave when they bump into each other on the page. It can take on one of the following values. Left, the left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Right, the right side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Both, neither side of the element will touch any other element within the same containing element. And none, the element can touch either side. So if we have all of our divs with a width of 200 pixels and a float of left, and all of our divs with the class special with a clear set to left, in the example above, all divs on the page are floated to the left side, so they'll be over here. The element with class special did not move all the way to the left because a taller div blocked its positioning. By setting its clear property to left, the special div will be moved all the way to the left side of the page. Instructions. Take a look at the answer, so the answer class divs on the web page. So I'm looking at them. They have been floated to the left. Am I looking at them right? Okay. Sorry, they have been floated to the left, but the question divs are touching the answer divs on the right. Let's fix this. In the question class selector, set the clear property to the left. So question set clear. Sorry. Looks a little bit better now. On second thought, this layout is not looking so good. My fault. Remove the float property from the answer selector rule set. Answer selector rule set. Where's the answer? Float. Get rid of that. Yeah, that's better. I like that. Okay. Review layout. Skipping through this. Oh man. Okay. How are we doing? Let me look at the syllabus. Oh man. Pretty much there, right? But I think this is where it makes sense to cut it short. I have to prepare for this meeting, and unfortunately I didn't get as far into CSS as I wanted to. But you know what? Maybe I'm giving up too soon. This has 8 sections. Come on, don't give up. I think I can do this. Okay, and CSS supports a wide variety of colors. These include named colors like blue, black, and lime green, along with colors described by a numeric value. Using a numeric system allows us to take advantage of the whole spectrum of colors that browsers support. In this lesson, we're going to explore all the color options CSS offers. This can be named colors like English words, RGB, numeric values, or HSL, numeric values that describe a mix of hue and saturation. We're zooming through this one, guys. Foreground versus background. So we see color red and background color red. Talked about this earlier. In style, CSS changed the foreground color of the H1 heading to midnight blue. So we have style H1 and color. So if I change this to midnight blue, you see that changes. Next, set the background color of H1 to aqua. Background color aqua. Oops. Aqua. I know. I'm gonna have to set another one. 1155. Right there. That's good. Okay. So next, hexadecimal. One syntax that we can use to specify colors is called hexadecimal. Colors specified using the system are called hex colors. A hex color begins, I know this. So in the browser is a web page that uses named colors and hex colors. We're going to translate the named colors into hex to be more consistent. The colors won't visually change yet. So in here, we're going to change, find the CSS rule, use the name color dark sea green and change its hex value to this. So copy that, dark sea green, and change this to that. Boom. Find the 4 other named colors of the roast types and convert them to their hex values. So sienna becomes this. Saddle brown becomes this. Brown becomes this. And black becomes this. RGB colors. There's another syntax for representing RGB values, commonly referred to as another syntax for representing. Yeah. Okay. I think this is a typo. It should be just color. Regardless, RGB is red, green, blue. So in style CSS, find the hex value 8F BC 8F 8F BC 8F and change it to this RGB value. This feels like busy work, doesn't it? All right, you know what? No. I said I'm going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And we're going to change this to this right there. Change this right there to this. Okay. Moving on. Hex and RGB. Hexadecimal and RGB color system, blah, blah, blah. And the green, change the background color to this. So background color and green, change change it to this. Change light to this. Change styles, the city one to that. Great. Oh my goodness. Such busy work. Vienna right here. And the Vienna rule. Change the background color to that. Okay. Heard ya. And the Italian rule. Change the background color to this. And then run the code. Nice. Hue, saturation, and lightness. The RGB color scheme is convenient because it's very close to how computers represent colors internally. There's another equally powerful system in CSS called the hue, saturation, lightness color scheme, abbreviated HSL. So you got this one is the hue, this one's the saturation, this one's the lightness. In the browser is a simple page with different colored rectangles. Look at that. In style.css, modify the lightness of the background color for this class selector. Midground to be 25%. So if we go to midground, background color, hue, saturation, lightness, change this one to 25. Okay, now we see it is less light. Change the saturation of the background color of the foreground class to 50%. So hue, saturation, change this one to 50. Nice, more saturated. Change the hue of the body selector's background color to 240 degrees. So body selector, background color, hue to 240. Change the color completely. Opacity and alpha. All of the colors we've seen so far have been opaque or non-transparent. When we overlap two opaque elements, nothing from the bottom element shows through the top element. So if we have HLSA, you're just adding an extra alpha right there. So to use opacity in the HSL scheme, 4 values instead of 3. So there, this becomes the opacity or the alpha. So give the element with class foreground an alpha value of 0.6. Remember to change HSL to HSLA. So foreground, HSLA, and add 0.6. Now we see it is blended. Give the element with the class midground a alpha value of 0.4. That too now it has translucence. Modify the body rules background color to have a value of RGB like this. Okay, right there. Paste that. Okay, and then review. We've completed our extensive tour of colors. Amazing. Skip this. So I believe now there's one more section, and that section will have to wait for another day, unfortunately, because it's just one more. And honestly, I might not even do it because typography is relatively easy concept to understand. So, and again, my goal is not to get a certificate or anything. My goal is just to refresh my memory of CSS and HTML, and I feel like I've done both. So from here, I can go learn JavaScript because I don't even really know JavaScript. Why don't I have a network connection? Oh, I do. All right, that's it. This was good though. This was good. Definitely feel like I have a better solid understanding of just how to build a web page, and like as I go now to learn JavaScript and React, and then next I actually just, what is this? Do I enable dictation? Sure. Not now. What is happening?